All right, everyone. Hello. Happy Thursday. I think it is. I don't even know what day of the week it is anymore, but that's all right. So, folks, Truman Return to Reason has been on the channel before, but I wanted to bring him back because Truman is one of these people that I do genuinely enjoy his perspective around a variety of things, and he listens to so many different voices and is able to really synthesize information in really interesting ways. And so, what I wanted to do was to bring him back, and we're going to have a little talk about where do we go from here. Essentially, where do we go from here? What are some things that we think we need to be paying attention to, insofar as where culture goes, what's going to happen with censorship, what's going to happen to all of us heretics that left the left to support the evil orange man. And I think it's going to be a really good conversation. And we have a little bit of structure. We don't have a ton of structure though. So I kind of just want to see where it goes. So if you are not familiar with Truman, he does have his own YouTube channel that I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend you subscribe to. The information is in the description right below us. I always enjoy his thoughts. Welcome back, Truman.
Hey, Carlin, thanks for that introduction. That's a lot better than the last time I sent you like this big thing from my locals page. And I'm like, oh my God. And you read that. I'm like, oh man. So no, I like that. I like that. And I as you pointed out, it's not very structured, but like we saw before we went live, we both have our
sticky notes.
Yeah. I'm a sticky note fiend, man. So every time I clean off my workspace, I always find all these sticky notes that are just like everywhere, man. I actually have one here that is from the last time we talked that it was like 5 somethings of a team or something. 5
dysfunctions of a team. Yeah.
Yeah. That note, everything else on it I've taken care of, but I haven't looked into that book yet, so I still have that note. But yeah, I'm lousy with Post-its.
I literally planned out my entire locals community on like 18 sticky notes that were just one on top of the other. And I planned it out with Joshua one day on our chat, and I kept those 18 sticky notes, and that has become my locals community. Because, of course, guys, both of us are on locals as well. So obviously, we always love to have you join us there. So, Truman, I wanted to talk to you because, I really appreciate your perspective on these things. And the big question in my mind is, what is next? Like, where does all of this go? What are some of your thoughts?
So yeah, and so whenever we talked the other day and you said that, I'm like, well, there's a lot of different ways we can go with that. I think it was late November or early December, someone asked me, a similar thing of like, how you doing? What happens next? And I said, well, I've found that I can usually gauge where I'm at mentally by just what my mind naturally drifts to. And at that point in time, every time I closed my eyes, I was thinking about dimensions if I was going to build a greenhouse and like go find some land that had like a natural like aquifer under it, and get some solar panels. And so, my point is that there's a lot of different trajectories, we can take that mentally of where do we go from here? Do you just buy a bunch of guns and go, I think Bridget Fedesi made the joke that places on like Zillow need to start adding whenever they're talking about the property they're selling, defensibility. Like, how defensible is this property and location? I thought that was a pretty funny joke. But yeah, so we can take like an apocalyptic view, which I think is, has tinges of accuracy, or we can take an optimistic view of what comes next. But I think one thing I'd like to start with that I was thinking about is I read this book, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 months ago by a guy named Simon Sinek. Have you ever
I know Simon Sinek. Yeah, I know him. Yep.
Yeah. First off, I don't know what that dude's accent is because he's an American and he was born here. But he's got this weird accent whenever he
does have a weird accent. Yes.
So, anyway, I just have to point that out because I'm like, does anyone else notice this? But Simon is a really interesting thinker. And the book that I read by him was called Start With Why. And, I think he puts a little bit too much emphasis on, how much purpose, or meaning a corporation can inject into the universe. But I think his general thesis that we have to kind of know why we're doing something before, or we have to know why in order for us to have like a sustainable or effective what, I think is really important. And so, before like all of these things that come next, whatever it is, and we can make predictions, until the sun goes down. I think why it matters and why we should care and why we should be engaged and why we should be paying attention, I think is the appropriate place to start. Because one of the things that we talked about the other day is, like, it seems to me, and you can tell me if you think this is right or not, that if you were to say broadly in the numbers, who is winning the war of ideas, the war of propaganda, even the war of converting people to their cause, is it the people who are, broadly speaking, obviously this is painting with a very broad brush, but those who are advocating for liberty and like the kinds of values that we have kind of always stood for, that are rooted in the American thought experiment, at least in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution? Or is it the people who, what I kind of describe falling under this broad umbrella of far left orthodoxy, which is kind of critical race theory, that conflict theory, oppressor oppressed, every America must be completely torn down and built anew under this new vision of equity and diversity, inclusion, and all these other things. Well, I'll ask you, who do you think is winning in terms of who has the numbers, or at least the perceived numbers right now?
Well, it's funny that this is the timing of this conversation, because if you asked me on Tuesday, I might say that it was the critical race theorists. But if you ask me today, we live in like a pre-GameStop and post-GameStop era right now.
I was so hoping you had followed that story, because I definitely want to talk about that at some point.
Yeah, and it's like I think that, broadly speaking, I think that the problem is, and why I'm honestly not sure I would have even said the critical race theorists were winning before anyway. And here's the reason why. It's not that, obviously that's something that is taken over everything and has gotten into every crack and crevice, and it's like water. It like infuses into everything. But at the same time, I don't think that most people understand what critical race theory is. I don't think they know what they're doing. I think that they hear buzzwords here and there, and they kind of think, "Oh, I need to do this to toe the line, or I need to do this to be a good person." But I think a lot of people, once especially they really start getting into the training, or once they are forced to read Robin DiAngelo or Ibram X. Kendi, I think that they have questions, and I think a lot of it people can see through the nonsense. The problem is that they don't have an avenue to speak up. So
Sure.
do I think that they're winning? I don't necessarily think so, because I don't think that we would be seeing the backlash in regards to what is now going on with the GameStop stuff, and we'll talk about that. And honestly, like, this is actually a moment of unity, isn't it? Isn't it
Yeah.
ironic? Like 2 days ago, we were talking about like, like, is there going to be a moment to unify between populist left and populist right? And now here we are, like it, and it happened in an instant, and it happened in like just a matter of days, with some people trolling on Reddit and concocting this crazy plan. So I don't know. I think I actually have more hope today than I did the other day that there's a chance of like turning this around.
Fair enough. And I think your point is taken. Yes.
There's a buck coming.
No. Well, maybe. How about I use the word however? Whenever I say winning, I guess what I mean is whenever I say like the perception of winning. So if you were to say every day, does the institutional stranglehold of this stuff get stronger or weaker? Like every day, let's take for example, we can fast forward to the federal level, but rescinding the 1776 thing, re-implementing the what they call racial sensitivity training, but it's just propaganda and why you should hate yourself if you're white training, and so on and so forth. Like if you were to say this week compared to last week compared to the week before that compared to the week before that, the how much stronger at an institutional level, whether it's higher ed, in corporations, at the federal government, in a regular education system, public education system, are they getting stronger or weaker? Are these ideas gaining more legitimacy or less legitimacy? And again, I would include the perception of legitimacy, which includes people just being silent and not saying anything. And so there is a false perception of consensus. But that's what I mean. So if I reframe it like
Yeah.
that, would you
Well,
have the same answer?
if that is the metric that we are going to use to establish if they're winning, then yeah, they're absolutely winning. Like Joe Biden has rescinded. Joe Biden has not only rescinded the executive order banning critical race theory training, but we know, and I don't actually know if you knew this, because I don't know if you were on that call, but we have a mutual acquaintance that works in the federal government,
Hmm.
and we now know that it's not just that Joe Biden rescinded that executive order. The next thing that's coming is that they are going to require this training for federal
Yep.
contractors. So if we're
Yep.
going by that standard, yeah, we know that they're winning. But I guess my perception, and this is obviously something we'll unpack over the course of this conversation, is I don't think that all hope is lost in
Yeah,
this.
no, not at all.
But if we're talking about like the establishment exerting their will onto all of us and trying to force this nonsense into every aspect of American life, yeah, they're in the power position right now.
Totally. Yeah. And so it's with that in mind, I think that they're winning. And part of the way that they have victory, at least in my mind, is through I think it's a delicate and it's a pretty fragile false consensus. And that is, I think one of the things, it might have been when we were talking the other day, or I was talking to Kevin yesterday, I can't remember which, but one of the things that I see as is the fact that no one asks questions. Like you said, people can't speak out or they don't know how to speak out about stuff. It's the fact that there is like an absence of critique. There's an absence of, and again, it doesn't even have to be something as complicated as knowing all of the stuff, all of the counterpoints, being able to talk about Marcuse and going all the way back into the postmodernists and stuff to describe this. But like just the base level of that, there's really not a lot of people who are just asking questions. I think of the way I conceptualize it is being an immovable object. I think we're facing what seems like an unstoppable force in this ideology, to borrow the phrasing of the Joker in The Dark Knight. But he says, this is what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. Batman is the immovable object in his mind. And there's just an absence of people who are willing to just be immovable objects and just say, no, I don't know. Like, this seems crazy. So does that make sense? Like, do you think that's a fair, at least like broad bird's eye view at one of the ways in which this thing enjoys the perception of consensus is because the majority of people who, if you remember the Hidden Tribe study that was done a couple of years ago, the vast majority of people who are in the country don't believe any of this stuff, aren't politically charged, aren't extreme in their views, but they don't feel comfortable speaking up. They're what was called, I believe, the exhausted majority. And so it's this really loud vocal minority that has sufficiently silenced and muzzled the exhausted majority into making it seem like there's a false consensus. And I use that to tee up this idea of why, in that, like, I think that there is definitely a level where the people who are silent about this stuff, who are maybe a little bit naive about it. I don't know if you watched the live stream that, so this was, man, I want to say in November or December. Do you even know where I'm going with this?
No, I don't.
Okay. You had the look. I'm like, oh man, she knows what I'm talking about. So it was James Lindsay and Brett Weinstein. And I'm trying to remember what the other guy's name is. He's on the Blockchain Reported podcast. What's his name?
I don't know.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm gonna have to look this up. But anyway, they were talking and they were talking about why they voted how they did. And you could see that so Brett voted third party, James voted Trump, and this other guy, man, that's gonna drive me crazy. Voted
Peter
for
Boghossian.
Biden.
Peter
No,
Boghossian.
not Pete Boghossian. No. I'll if you look up Blockchain Reported, it's a good podcast actually.
I said that because someone chatted it in. It was a stab in the dark.
Yeah. No, anyway, but it's a pretty big podcast, and he had this naivete about like what was coming down the pike with this ideology, this toxic ideology. And his thing was, well, Biden's a moderate. Like, don't you know the moderates won? Like, they won. Like, we beat the Bernie crowd, and so on and so forth.
They
Um,
beat the Bernie crowd with
Exactly. Well, right. And so that's why my point is
okay.
that he had a perception of the, I guess, the danger, the sense of urgency, the threat level. I don't really like using this kind of charged rhetoric, but it's what people maybe most understand what I'm saying. Um, you could say the severity of the situation. Um, and I think that back to the notion of why, I think that a lot of people don't know why it's such a big deal. They have that view of like, okay, so what's the big deal? This is just, I go back, this was a kind of a big eye opener for me, but whenever there was that debate, I think it was it would have been the first debate between Trump and Biden that was hosted by the Fox News. I don't know, I'm drawing a blank on his name
Chris
too.
Wallace.
Yeah, Chris Wallace, and he's talking about the CRT training that they were receiving, and he kept calling it racial sensitivity training.
Yeah.
And I think most people don't know why this is such a big deal. They don't know why they should care about what comes next. They don't know why they should be paying attention to any of these things. And that seems to me is like the more important, or at least the initial barrier, that we have this barrier of entry into people even giving a damn about this, because they don't really understand exactly what it is we're dealing with. They know that the news seems calmer, and that's a whole nother thing about how the possibility of the news to work the entire country up into a fervor and generate, have this fabricated environment of chaos. But I don't know. I think that there has to be something that first has to be done. Like, in other words, the type of people who would tune into what we're talking about here and do care about what comes next already have the why, because they're like, yeah, this is scary stuff. Like you're talking about our mutual friend who works in the federal government. But it seems to me that we have the way I frame it is a pastor versus an evangelist, issue, that we've got a lot of people that are preaching to the choir about this kind of stuff, with people that already agree with them, but we don't have a real good method for evangelizing, so to speak, which is just another way of saying maybe persuading, giving people initial buy-in or curiosity into why they should care about what comes next. Why should they care about this stuff that's being put in the federal level? Why should they care about all these executive orders that are signed? Why should they care about what is taking place in the news? Or why should they care about Parler being taken off of the Amazon servers? Well, Parler is just a right-wing hate chamber, right? Why should I care about that? So I don't know. I wanted to kind of pick your brain on that. First, for at least a little bit, and then get into maybe some of the specifics. But does that make sense? Does any of that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think what I picked up from what you just said is that part of the problem is that, and this is something that I've been preaching about, quite frankly, part of the problem is that we have done a really shitty job of explaining what this thing is to average everyday people. So if
Yep.
you have a friend that says, "Oh, you need to become anti-racist because racism is bad, and you need to read White Fragility and do what Robin DiAngelo tells you to do because racism is bad." Well, I mean, of course, racism is bad. Of course, racism is bad, and no one wants to be called a racist. And if the average person has a choice between, oh, I'm going to be called a racist, or I'm going to read this White Fragility book and pretend to agree with this training, or maybe they even convince themselves that it's real. Like, of course they're going to choose that, because the alternative is you're going to be ostracized from your friends, you're going to lose your job, and people are going to call you a racist, right? So of course they're going to choose the path of least resistance. I think the problem is that we have done a really shitty job of explaining to people what this is and why it's dangerous. And that's actually something that I'm working on right now. I'm working on a project and a website that I hope is hopefully going to be one of the solutions to this, to help people, like just the average everyday person that doesn't have time to understand what is critical race theory, how do I identify it, how do I speak woke. Because I think I have total respect and admiration for what James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose and Peter Boghossian have done. I really do. I think that New Discourses is fabulous. I'm working my way through Cynical Theories right now. But the problem is, anyone who's ever read Cynical Theories knows that that is a meaty read.
It's heady. Yeah.
That is an academic book, and there is a translation that needs to take place between academia and average person, because average people, they work a job, They come home, they just want to eat dinner and spend time with their kids and maybe kick back and watch TV for a couple hours. They don't want to sit down and read academic stuff. And while
Yep.
I absolutely believe that that is necessary, and a critical piece of all of this, I think that all of the solutions that I've seen coming out to fight this, they're too grounded in academia. And I think it's perfectly reasonable and fair to fight what started in academia. In academia, there needs to be academics doing this, but now this has bled into everything else. And so, for my money, until we have a way to be able to translate this stuff in a way that average people can understand what it is and how to identify it and how to fight back against it, we're not going to make any progress on this, because this is not just about convincing people with PhDs. This is about convincing the average guy who, maybe works as a welder or whatever, like why this is showing up in his kid's school.
Yep. Yeah, I think what you just said about academia is exactly right. So I just wanted to look up, see a quick statistic to kind of go along with what you just said. I want to see how many people graduated from college in 2018. How many people do you think that is?
How many people?
From college? Yeah. How many people?
I don't know. Hundreds of thousands at least.
Well, let's take millions, so that I'm not sitting here Googling stuff. But the reason why I bring that up is that I think that one thing that is part of that naivete and part of that maybe underestimating this kind of thing. Pew Research does a lot of polls that study the thoughts of different generations, and one thing that you can consistently see in any of that polling is that every year the amount of people that you would say are friendly towards socialism, antagonistic towards capitalism, believe the government should do more, not less, believe the government should be bigger, not smaller, and all of these different things, those numbers go up every single year. And so we kind of have an asymmetrical relationship with time here, in that every year that passes, and the more, let's say it's millions, however many millions of people graduate from the university system. I picked 2018 instead of like 19 or any of the coronavirus stuff, but is another year that a fresh batch of millions of pissed off, in most cases, newly, brainwashed or propagandized activists who are of voting age enter the system. And so you're exactly right to say that we have to address it at an educational level. And also there's people don't realize that this is in the K through 12 as well. And so, like, to your point about how, there is a translation issue, that people just don't have. Like, the way I think about it is, so Nassim Taleb talks about this idea of skin in the game, that you can trust people who are part of a system or are providing inputs into a system if they also have skin in the game, which is another way of saying, like, they'll pay a penalty for being wrong. Mm-hmm. And so they have something at stake in that. And one of the things right now, which I think, as you mentioned, is that there are a lot of people that they don't want to read academic stuff. They don't want to have to get into a lot of this heady stuff. And I think that they don't realize that they have skin in the game. They have something at stake here. They just don't know it. They don't know exactly what it is. And quite frankly, I think it sucks that the average American, like, I think politics is something that should be incredibly niche, all of this kind of stuff. And I know this isn't just politics. Like, this is politics is a really low res way of describing what we're talking about. But the political realm is where these ideas are, I think, most discussed, or at least in the context of that. Like, for example, whether or not America is a systemically racist country, or whether or not we have to root out white supremacy, all these other things, that's a generally apolitical notion and conversation, but they happen in the context of, Trump versus Biden, or, whatever thing. Usually they happen in a political context of left versus right, however meaningless that definition is now. And so that's, whenever I was talking about, the why thing, is that there's a lot of people that don't know why they should care. And it's that issue you described. They don't know, they don't have the information packaged in a way that lets them know. Like, think about like at doctor's offices, they have those pamphlets that describe like really serious and complex biological things in a way that a person who's just sitting there can read and digest and understand in a few minutes. So like they'll have those charts. I remember at the health center where I went and got my bachelor's degree, they had this thing about whenever you quit smoking, here's what happens to your body within 1 day, 7 days, 14 days, and so on and so forth. They didn't give all of the biological details of, this toxin leaving your system and this thing populating and all those other things. They just said, here's the part you need to know why you should care about why you should not be smoking, for example. And so like, we don't have something like that kind of pamphlet, that digestible thing for people to know why they should care. And so it's just easier for them to sit it out. And because frankly, I think for a lot of people, this isn't interesting. It's not fun. It's relationally tense. A lot of the context of these conversations take place in environments where they don't want to alienate people, whether it be their work environment, their family, their social circles, increasingly their churches. And so it's just easier to sit this one out. And so we do have that kind of translation issue that you described for sure.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think that, why should they care? Well, we need to make this. And again, this is something that I'm actively working on right now. So hopefully at least some semblance of a resource will be coming pretty soon. But we need people to, it's funny. I got my tax documents today from a business that I used to have a partnership with that was destroyed by the little socialists on Twitter when they emailed them and was like, did you know she did a PragerU video? But whatever. And then I had to have a conversation with the owner of the company where he called me a racist. And I was like, okay. But I was trying to explain to him on that conversation, I was like, because this is an organizational training company. And I was like, if you think this is not going to come for you, like, you are not paying attention. And his answer was like, no, Carl, this, I'm not interested in this. I'm not interested in this. You're being a racist. And I was like, okay, well, good luck, because it's coming your way, and it's coming your way sooner than you think. And I think that you're absolutely right that people don't think that they have skin in the game, or that it's not even, Truman, that I don't think that they think they have skin in the game. It's that they're going like this. Like, I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it. No. Don't show me what they're teaching my kids in school. Don't show me what this training is actually doing. It's like, not only don't they realize that it is going to come for them at some point, it's like they've put up every resistance and they're like, this is fine. This is fine. I don't see it. So, and I think that people really need to understand. And I'm putting the fingers on myself. Like, I need to do a better job of this. I think that everyone who's talking about this needs to do a better job of this. People need to understand this is being taught to your children right now, starting in elementary school. I just saw a proposal today and I guess this has been around for a couple months, but I just happened to see it today in the Illinois Department of Education is proposing changes to the curriculum to licensed teachers that requires them to go through this training, requires it. So it's going to be in the schools at all different levels. It is going to be in the workplace. You are going to, especially like federal contractors in the government, it is going to come. And so I think that really getting it in people's face and like saying, this is what this is, and this is what they're teaching you. And it has to be very quick and easy to understand. And the description that I came up with it, and I was trying to develop just a quick elevator pitch to get people to understand what this is. And I could not even get anyone to talk about this definition with me, to include James Lindsay, to be honest, because I reached out to him about it. And I said, can we just tell people that critical race theory is judging someone based on the color of their skin rather than the content of their character? Can we just start there? And the challenge that I always run into is, well, no, that's too simple. That doesn't go into all the details. Well, you don't need to go into all the details. You just need to get people's attention to help them understand really, really quickly why this is bad. We believe that it is racist to judge people based on the color of their skin. Therefore, if that's racist for one person, that's racist for all people. Racism is bad. We are not in favor of racism. So therefore, we cannot be in favor of this ideology that is specifically around judging people based on their skin color or their gender or their sexual orientation or what have you, rather than what they are contributing.
Yep. Yeah. First off, I think that kind of inverted MLK, I Have a Dream definition for CRT is really quite good. Briefly, so on whenever you're talking about the kind of the fact that people don't really realize that this is being taught to their kids. So I work for a school district, and I, every single year anyone that works in education will tell you that there is always this new program that the schools are always signing up for, to make teachers' lives easier, and it's usually just a repackaging of the previous program. And so this past, whenever this year started, they had signed up for this new one, and it's just a way for teachers to create online flashcards and stuff, but the whole district has it. And part of this program, this website, is they send out a blog post, and they send out stuff. And actually at the beginning of the year, in August, they sent out a thing that was about, I think I posted about it on my locals, where it was this blog post about how you can inject conversations about race into math, and how you should always be talking about race and inequalities. And then here was the one they sent out after what happened at the Capitol. I'll just read you this one part here, because it was about how we should, as an educator, you're here to tell them what to think about these things. And so here's one of the things I said in there. Our students deserve better from our leadership, and so do our teachers. The truth is that teachers aren't asked only to teach. You're asked to lead our students through hard moments and translate chaotic, frightening events into words that make sense, to provide a place of safety, whether in a classroom or through the screen. It's not much to ask, yet we do it every day. And then they go on to say, violence like this is not normal. It is not just something that happens, and we need our students to know that as well. To change our future for the better, we must recognize and challenge the racism and bigotry that fuel these acts of violence. And so, that's the type of thing that's being sent out to, this is a program to help you make flashcards, right? It's not, but that's just how ubiquitous this kind of thing is. And how whenever I was asking at the beginning, where I've heard Brett Weinstein describe this ideology as, he says, it's easier to ask the question, where isn't it? Asking where is it is a long conversation. It's much shorter to say, where isn't it? I don't know where this thing isn't. And so exactly. And so that was just something that I thought of whenever you said that about K through 12. And to the other point, about how I think that, there are some people doing that. I think maybe, yeah. I think I don't think that describes everyone. I think there's a lot of people that are genuinely brainwashed, but I think it's a lot of people, that just don't want to do it. Eric Hoffer writes in The True Believer about how people that are benefiting from reality, at least, and are aware of it, just a normal kind of person, they're much less likely to fight for the maintenance of reality than a person who doesn't perceive they're benefiting from reality will fight for utopia, will fight for fantasy, will fight for revolution. And the answer for that is quite simple. I mean, reality sucks. Reality is just mortgages and coming home, to screaming kids, and I got a flat tire, and the in-laws are in town, and, and COVID and all these other things. Reality is reality, and that includes all of its, hardships that come along with it. If you're fighting for a fantasy, if you're fighting for utopia, you're going to fight like crazy because, it's perfect. Why wouldn't you give everything you have to do that? And so, I think that there are a lot of people, like you said, that are I just don't want to see it. I don't want to do it, because that means fighting for reality, and reality is hard. But unfortunately, reality is all there is. People fighting for utopias are going to encounter a different reality shortly if they achieve their dreams of that. So question. All right. So I had a thought about, you're talking about kind of what comes next kind of thing. So I thought maybe we could talk about, maybe some of the broad, if you were to say that this was like Jeopardy, right? And there's the big categories, the broad things of what people, could be thinking about. And we could maybe go a little bit apocalyptic and dark for a little bit before going optimistic, I guess.
Let's do it. Let's do let's do doom and gloom for a little while.
Okay. So for that, here's what I'll say. Can I just and maybe this would be a bad idea. I don't know. You could tell me, but I could just kind of ramble off a few different categories of some things that I think about that scare the hell out of me. And we can talk about all of those or any of those, you know, whichever ones interest you the most. And then we can pivot to the, you know, I guess the sunshine, the light at the end of the tunnel, if you want.
I guess I think there's a couple topics that we can both agree on, but I think that kind of where I'd like to tee into this is I think that there are topics that are important, and then there are topics that are covered that are not important.
Oh, I love you so much. Yes.
So why don't we, like, because this happens all the time, and frankly, this comes from both the right and the left. The right is very easily distracted by things that are unimportant. So
you don't have any recent examples of that, do you, Doctor?
Oh, I do have a recent example of that, Truman. How about the 2 straight weeks of the Daily Wire complaining about Joe Biden's doctorate? Yep. That is something that is unimportant. And people thought that, it was ridiculous. And people thought that I was only annoyed about that because I have a PhD. Like, I never gave 2 flips if people called me doctor or not. I was annoyed about it because I was like, the election has just happened. There's stuff going on that I can't even talk about on YouTube anymore, which we'll get to the censorship stuff in a second, that is actually important. The critical race theory is about to come in and take over everything because Biden's going to get rid of all these executive orders, and you guys are concerned about whether or not Joe Biden is called doctor. Like, that was one of the stupidest things that has ever happened in the history of stupid.
It's the worst hill to die on. I don't understand it. Yeah. So no, I love that. So I know that I told you this whenever we talked the other day, but just for those watching, what you just said is absolutely right. I wrote about this in a piece that I put on my locals. I think it was sometime in December, and I was just thinking about how important it is that we really calibrate our sense-making apparatus internally. Because so let's take the practical example of what we saw and then kind of how we can avoid it. What we saw over the last 4 years was that everything was ratcheted up to 11. And so the general response, you know, to anything that came out of the Trump administration or anything that was perceived as a threat to the establishment was cranked up to 11. So it wasn't that we were arresting people at the border. It's kids in cages. It's concentration camps. You know, it wasn't that, you know, there was a clash of, you know, people in Kenosha's, Kyle Rittenhouse, you know, and these white supremacists were out murdering BLM activists in the street, and so on and so forth. And so, like, and it's that Trump is a Russian plant and fascist and Nazi and white supremacist. Like, we saw the normalization of some of the most like hyper dangerous words that you could imagine. And we saw a little bit of this prior to that, or prior to the 2016 election with the punch a Nazi kind of thing. And just, you know, Nazi doesn't mean anything. We saw it with the on-campus stuff where, like, rape doesn't mean anything, where, you know, people saying if a person was standing next to them that's rape. And so it waters down the experience of people who are actually raped. Like, so we saw that happen. And I think one of the, like, best ways to put it is that, or at least for me, when I think about it, if I try to put myself in the shoes of people, like, let's say maybe in the media or those who were, like, on the left and were pissed off that Trump was president, is they took the fact that they felt an emotion of maybe anger, frustration, anxiety, or something whenever they were reminded of the current situation, and they interpreted that as a legitimate threat or something serious and something to respond to. And one of the things that made me think that, and why I even wrote that article, is that I was noticing that if I just saw a headline, so I've got a bunch of news apps on my phone. News, we need a new word for that, by the way. But a bunch of those apps on my phone, and if I would get a headline update notification that was like President-elect Biden or something about Kamala Harris or any of that fawning, sycophantic crap that they've been on since the election, I would just get pissed off just from seeing it. And I realized that, okay, like, I need to, you know, look internally, have a little bit of self-awareness, and, like, am I pissed at the content of this article? Because if I read the article, there's nothing here. There's nothing actionable in this article that I need to be worried about on a practical level. I think I'm just frustrated that I'm being reminded of the situation we're now in. And so I wrote this thing that I called a guide to red objects, and it was red balloons, red flags, and red alerts. And I talked about the song 99 Red Balloons by Nina, which I love that song. It's just a great song anyway. I think it's a pretty genius song. And the premise is, for anyone who's lived under a rock, is these kids go and buy a bunch of red balloons. And the song was written kind of at the end of the Cold War, in the mid 80s. And they buy a bunch of red balloons, and they let them go, and it shows up on the radar of the various war machines, and they think that World War III has started. And so it starts this nuclear holocaust that ends in the destruction of the planet, all because these people saw these red balloons, and they took it as an act of war, and they couldn't discern between something that was actually a threat and something that wasn't. The end of the song, it's all over and I'm standing pretty in this dust that was a city. Like it's a great song. I think it's really beautifully written, if I haven't mentioned that. So, but my point is that there's a lot of things that we're going to see, coming out of the news or on social media. I got rid of Facebook, which my life's already better for that, but that people are going to see, whether they're scrolling through Facebook, Instagram, or just, paying attention to kind of what's going on, Twitter or whatever, that I think the overwhelming majority of it's going to be red balloons. That's going to be things that kind of show up on their radar and will elicit a reaction in them, but there's really nothing there. And they're just frustrated by being reminded of the situation that we're in. And I think probably a lot of the people in your audience will identify with that, of, just seeing, whenever, like during the inauguration, for example, they're talking about the lights, in the Capitol represent Joe Biden's arms wrapped around the country. Like
God.
that is some disgusting sycophantic crap. And it enrages me. But there's nothing there. That's just like, I don't get new information from that. It's just a reminder of information I already have, which is our news isn't news. It's a propaganda arm of the leftist establishment.
Well,
And
I want to interject here, because it's not only that these news stories are unimportant. It's not only that these news stories are not giving us any new information. It's that they are specifically intended to be a distraction.
Absolutely. Yep.
That is the goal of the news story. So every time people on the right, or who are trying to fight back against this ideology, because they're not all on the right, but anytime someone who's trying to fight back against this gives into this inclination to complain about these news stories, complain about CNN and how someone on CNN said something stupid for 3 days, or complain about Jill Biden's doctorate or whatever, they're winning. They're very literally winning. You are allowing them to win based on where you're putting your energy and attention, because you've removed all your energy from the things that are actually important to focus on complaining.
Yeah, no, that's right. It's not a net neutral. It's not neutral to be distracted by that. It's actually a net negative, because you're dedicating energy to something that's unimportant, and as such, you're removing your potential to give energy to things that are important and that do require energy. I think that's exactly right. Like it's, the very first YouTube video I ever made was in response to Parkland, and it wasn't about Parkland. It was about the news media. And I talked about how, people want, whenever, especially when they're scared or when they're angry, they want quick answers to complicated questions, and they will accept anyone who will confidently offer them a quick, oversimplified answer to a complicated question. And that's the mental equivalent of fast food. It is, it might be filling at the time, but it has no nutritional value. And if that's all you consume intellectually is that oversimplified distraction crap to complex issues, or to issues that don't even matter at all, it's going to be really bad for you mentally. The way, if you only eat Big Macs, it's going to be bad for you physically. Although I guess maybe Trump is the exception, because I thought that dude mostly ate just like Big Macs or Whoppers or something.
He loves fast food. He does.
Yeah. So anyway, but yeah, that's exactly right. So there's going to be a lot of red balloons that are out there intended as a distraction for us. But there, some of those things, I think that if you were going to put things in, like classify them of quantity of greatest to least, the greatest is going to be red balloons. And then the second most is going to be red flags, where it's like, okay, no, that should worry you, right? So I'm getting these things about climate justice and these executive orders about climate justice, and how he's, pausing drilling and, fracking and all this other stuff. And I'm like, okay, that's a red flag to me, depending on exactly where it is, what the implications are for our energy independence and those kinds of things. But again, it's not really anything that's manifested yet. Like whenever we see like things, them talking about doing this or talking about wanting to pursue something, that's still kind of opaque and vague, that's something we should pay attention to. Like that article I sent you the other day about how they're going to look at regulations, no longer from a financial standpoint, but from, I know they threw the word in there, economic, but it was mostly about equity and justice and all these other, really broadly defined words that they could use to justify whatever they wanted. That's a red flag to me, but I haven't seen a policy come from it yet. I haven't seen a regulation be put in place yet that's based on that has tangible results. And then there's the last one that I think that we will have happen, that we already are seeing happen, but are going to be the smallest in nature, and that the red balloons serve to distract us from is the red alerts. Like, so for example, every federal contractor or every teacher being required to take CRT training, that's a red alert to me, because you're now instantiating this as accepted doctrine, and you're ensuring that the federal government is backing this and saying, like, that really kind of puts it on par with any like curriculum that's taught in schools. Like, it's another way of saying, of packaging as accepted fact, which is really scary, to be honest with you. Whenever the federal government puts a stamp and says, this isn't optional, you're required to learn this. Well, there's lots of things that we're required to learn. We're required to learn, like get our driver's license if we want to know how to drive. Like anytime the federal government mandates that we be educated in something, it's because they're presumably it's important for our day-to-day lives, that it's a fact that we have to know and have to have in order to be good citizens of the United States. And whenever they instantiate things that are not just demonstrably false, but harmful to the social fabric and everyone, not just on the receiving end of it, but those who internalize it themselves, that's a big problem. That's a big issue. And so that would be an example of a red alert in my mind. But to the broader point, like we do have, like what you said, there's gonna be a lot of noise, a lot of distraction, and people who are interested in knowing, like, okay, I'm pissed, I'm angry, I'm anxious, whatever that describes a lot of us right now at any given time. We have to have a really well calibrated sense making mechanism, because let's again to look at the contrast of the last 4 years. The left generally, I use this very general, we need better terms, but and the media did not have really well calibrated sense making mechanisms. Now, I'm not sure they're interested in that, but the point is that they turned every molehill into a mountain. They made everything cranked up to 11. They created this false perception, this false environment of chaos, and they lost a lot of credibility with a lot of people because of the fact that they were willing to just treat everything like the biggest threat in the world, and not focus on the things that matter. And so we don't want to do that, I guess, is my point.
Right.
And in order to do that, we have to be incredibly intentional, because here's the problem. This only comes through intentionally doing it and developing it. If you're like just kind of on autopilot with this stuff, then it won't happen. You have to cultivate this and intentionally go, okay, I'm going to, and it's work. And that's the other thing that sucks about it. Cause like you said, most people just want to go home and watch their shows and not do this work. But it's one more thing that we have to do if we don't want to fall into that same trap. And which means that they will, and I'll close it here. If we do get distracted, if we do just chase red balloons for the next however many years, then they will get away with whatever the bigger thing is that's taking place. Eric Weinstein talks about how the idealism of every age is what's used to mask its theft. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. And so we will be distracted with, the Dr. Jill Biden stuff or whatever thing, fawning news coverage with CNN. And the real stuff will be happening behind us in the background if we don't really calibrate our sense-making mechanisms well. All right.
Well, and I want to just throw one more wrench into the works, because I think that the reason that red balloons, the reason that red balloons are so effective is that they're usually the sexy things, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're the things that are like easy to understand, easy to grasp. Like it makes people angry right away. It's like they have a visceral reaction to these things. Like the amount, and I do hate to keep going back to this example, but it really is just the best example that has happened lately. Like calling Jill Biden Dr. Biden just viscerally pisses people off.
Yep.
For no good reason. Like there's no value in a title that you don't give it. So like there's no reason that this pisses people off, but it pissed people off so much that there were news stories about it every single day for 2 goddamn weeks.
Yep.
And it's like it's so easy to get sucked into this, and I think that a lot of people, and especially the people that, I mean, frankly, like we saw a lot of high information people susceptible to this. Like low information people that we're always trying to reach, they don't give two shits if we call Joe Biden doctor. Like no one really cares. But it's like
No.
the people, this is probably why it bothered me so much. These are the people that should know better, and
Mm.
they're just as susceptible. And I think a lot of times high information voters, they put themselves up on this little pedestal. They say, well, we have the information and we have the facts, and those silly peons, they'll just watch CNN and they don't know what they're talking about. Ha ha ha. Yeah, I mean, they can be just as elitist, frankly,
Yep.
as someone that has a Harvard degree and thinks that a Harvard degree makes them better and smarter than everyone else. And they
Yep.
do the exact same thing. And then they get sucked so easily into these nonsense fights. But it's because that's the sexy thing. The red alerts, like what you're talking about, these are usually like the least sexy thing in the world. It requires you to read policy documentation. It requires you to read academic stuff that's boring to read. And it takes more time to wrap your head around it and understand it. And that's what makes it so insidious and so dangerous, is like, in order to really fight the battles that we need to fight and that are worth fighting to maintain, free speech and make sure that we can just move forward functionally as a society, we need to do the things that are frankly the most boring.
Yep. That's right. You ever watch Rick and Morty?
No.
Oh man. Okay. So it's a great show. And I know there's probably like everyone who's watching this had one of two reactions, like, oh yeah, I love Rick and Morty, or this is one of those assholes that watches Rick and Morty. So fine, I don't care. But there's this episode, it's kind of like one of the most notorious episodes of the show, called Pickle Rick. And Rick, he's this genius scientist, and he turns himself into a pickle to get out of going to family therapy. And at the end of it, the therapist goes into this diatribe. Actually, Susan Sarandon guest stars as the voice for her, and she just talks about the nature of work and how it's boring, and how in order, like, the most important things for maintenance, how she basically tells Rick, I have no doubt you would be bored during this session the same way I'm bored every time I brush my teeth or wipe my ass, because that's the thing about maintenance, like maintaining yourself physically and mentally. It's work, and there's nothing, you can't do it so wrong that you die, but it's still necessary in order to be a healthy person. And like, to what you just said, like, yeah, the things that are the most unglamorous and that are the most, I guess maybe tedious or monotonous, whatever word you want to use there to describe it, they are work, but they're also what's necessary. Just like that, brushing your teeth or wiping your ass or whatever, like, that is absolutely crucial. Like, if someone said, like, hey, I stopped doing either of those things, you'd be like, well, you should probably see someone. But at the same time, those are the most like mundane, kind of average everyday things, but that are necessary for our maintenance. And I think in the same way, like what you're talking about, our maintenance as, like, whether it's an informed citizen or someone who, does have skin in the game, someone who needs to be involved in these things, it's boring work. It's not glamorous. It's not sexy stuff. Like you said, it's policy. It requires understanding things that, again, most people are interested in, and frankly are justified in not being interested in. I mean, think about this, like, politics, let's take it whenever politics wasn't like everything's the end of the world and no one accepts elections and all this other stuff. Prior to that, it was kind of this niche thing. Whenever I was younger, my bachelor's is in political science. I always said that election year was kind of like my Super Bowl or my playoffs. I just thought it was interesting and entertaining. It's a niche thing that not everyone is interested in. But right now, everyone is required, I think, or at least being told that they have to take a side, that they have to take an interest in it. Like, imagine if every single person in the country right now was forced to, for threat of losing social relationships or their jobs, to really care about the Super Bowl here, in, I guess, a week and a half. Like, that's not fair for people to have to do. Most people don't care about the Super Bowl. A lot of people do. I'm one of those people. You can't really see it, I got my Chiefs hats over there. Like, okay, I get it. But it's that same kind of thing where something that's really niche and that most people don't have an inherent interest in are being told, you have to care, you have to have an opinion, you have to be able to talk about this around the water cooler or whatever, to use that, kind of old, picture of the corporate environment. Otherwise, like, you risk being alienated, you risk saying the wrong thing or whatever. And the way to do it effectively is to engage in that boring, mundane work. And the easier way to do it is to just say, go with the flow, and go along with whatever the accepted orthodoxy is. And so I just want to again acknowledge, it sucks that people have to do that. It sucks that they're being required to be sucked into this thing that they didn't ask for, they don't care about. And frankly, that they shouldn't necessarily care about it. It shouldn't be that important. There's a lot more to life than politics and this ideological crap. Like most things in life are not about those things. But that's what's required of us. Like I said the other day to you, every age has something that's required of the people living in it. Every time has something that's required of the people living in it. If you look back at various times in history, to times when things were a lot worse than they are now, I would put like World War II in that time frame. Like, there were people that just wanted to live their lives that were all of a sudden required to get involved in the war effort. Whenever Pearl Harbor happened, my grandpa and my grandma were living in southern Iowa. My grandpa had a newborn kid. He was in his late 20s, and they owned a tractor implement dealership where they would sell, to people in Iowa and Missouri who needed this stuff for their farming equipment. And Pearl Harbor happened, and my grandpa joined the Navy and moved out took my grandma and his young son out to California. And he didn't know how to swim, and he served the entire war in the Pacific Theater on a ship that transported supplies and stuff to the battleships. But the point is that he didn't want to do that. He wasn't asked to do that. And I'm not equating us to people who, go storm the beaches at D-Day. Far from it. But my point is that every time has something that's asked of you, whether it's fair or not, whether it's what you want to do or not. The question isn't, is it fair? The question isn't, do you want to do it? The question is it necessary? And everything we're talking about here is necessary, regardless of how much of our emotions are connected to it.
All right. Well, I think that's a great segue into what are the things that people should be concerned about. And I think that, we've seen one of those things loud and clear in the past couple of days, which is I was frankly really blown away and disturbed at a guy that made a meme for the 2016 election is now being prosecuted for trying to take someone's voting rights away and might spend 10 years in prison for making a meme.
Yep.
So I think that one of the things that we probably both agree on that is actually something that we should be concerned about is anytime speech is being infringed, like what they're trying to do to this guy, or frankly, when we have big tech platforms telling you there are subjects that you are not allowed to talk about. There are subjects we cannot talk about right now for fear of this stream just being pulled right down. And they're not crazy conspiracy theories. They're literal court cases that are still going on, and we're not allowed to talk about them. So can we agree that these types of things are, if not red alerts, then at least red flags?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think the issue of censorship is a complicated one. But yeah, the simplest word that comes to my mind is, concerning. And so I pulled a quote. So first I want to talk about one part of it, and then we can get into the tech thing. But this is a quote from John Stuart Mill from On Liberty. And so I want to touch on this, and then let's get into some of the tech stuff or how it wields its power. So he writes, like other tyrannies, the tyranny of the majority was at first and is still vulgarly held in dread, chiefly as operating through the acts of the public authorities. So again, people in the mid 1800s wrote very verbose sentences, but the point is he's saying the tyranny of the majority, the tyranny that was exercised on the population has always historically been through public authority, through government, basically. Mm-hmm. But he goes on to say, but reflecting persons perceived that when society is itself the tyrant, society collectively over the separate individuals who compose it, it means its means of tyrannizing are not restricted to the acts which it may do by the hands of its political functionaries. In other words, he's saying that if there's a social tyranny of a collective, of a majority on individual citizens, they actually have a lot more methods of tyrannizing people than the government does. And he says society can and does execute its own mandates. And if it issues wrong mandates instead of right, or any mandates at all in things which it ought not to meddle, it practices a social tyranny more formidable than many kinds of political oppression, since, though not usually upheld by such extreme penalties, it leaves fewer means of escape, penetrating much more deeply into the details of life and enslaving the soul itself. So he's saying whenever society does organize around these kinds of tyrannies, these accepted orthodoxies, and so on and so forth, like even though it might not be as extreme, like how the government could do, like they'll put you to death or something, he's saying that it's much more difficult to escape. It's much more extreme. It penetrates more deeply into the details of your life because it's not limited to your interaction with the government. It's limited to all your, or it comprises all your social circles. So your work, your church, your community, and so on. And then he says, protection, therefore, against the tyranny of the magistrate is not enough. There needs protection also against the tyranny of the prevailing opinion and feeling, against the tendency of society to impose, by other means than civil penalties, its own ideas and practices as rules of conduct on those who dissent from them, to fetter the development and, if possible, prevent the formation of any individuality not in harmony with its ways, and compel all characters to fashion themselves upon the model of its own. There is a limit to the legitimate interference of collective opinion with individual independence, and to find that limit and maintain it against encroachment is as indispensable as a good condition to human affairs as protection against political despotism. So what he's saying is that social tyranny, the tyranny of a collective majority, the tyranny of the population, the tyranny of like whatever the zeitgeist, the prevailing, what he calls the accepted opinions, has a much more far-reaching implications than government tyranny. Mm-hmm. And that comes whenever there is like some, he was speaking, at a time whenever that might be more religious in nature, or if you're thinking like slavery versus anti-slavery, perhaps. But the point is that it can penetrate more deeply. And we saw that. That's what tech is. Tech is a social institution. Big tech companies, and so on and so forth, they're not the government, but we just discovered how powerful they are in, wielding authority and censoring the population. We learned that Twitter is more powerful than the sitting president of the United States. As much as they like to talk about the person with the nuke button, the person with their finger on the nuke button, that person wasn't as powerful as Jack Dorsey. And so we have to have a conversation about this social tyranny. And that's, going back to the very beginning of what I said, at least the perception of this accepted orthodoxy, these accepted ideas. I don't think Jack Dorsey would do what he did. I don't think Facebook would do what they do. I don't think Amazon would have done that to Parler if it didn't seem like it was the will of the majority, because they're businesses at the end of the day. And so I think that there is this weird kind of interplay between the loudest voices, again, going back to the Hidden Tribe study, and the way those are amplified on these platforms. And it creates a feedback loop to where they're amplifying these voices. Those voices are what's shaping their view of what they should be doing. And so it's just this positive feedback loop over and over again that just keeps reinforcing itself. But it's incredibly scary. And anyway, yeah, sorry, go on.
Well, let's even back this out, because I completely agree with you that Amazon and Facebook and Twitter and all these big tech companies would not have done the things that literally prove that they are more powerful than the people that we actually elected to be in government. I mean, there's no question. It's not even just that they're more powerful than the United States government. They're more powerful than any government in the world. Yep. Except for maybe the one in Poland, I think that is fining tech companies $2 million if they do this crap for each time, which is maybe something that we should consider. But why are they doing this? Because they know they can get away with it.
100%.
It's the easiest answer. They know they can get away with it. Well, why do they know that they can get away with it? Because we have now raised an entire generation of people who believe that the answer to anything that you don't like is to cancel the thing that you don't like, is to say that if you say something that I don't like, I'm not going to be friends with you anymore. If you say something that I don't like, I'm going to petition the store to take your product out of the store. And frankly, we've seen this happening on the right too. And I think that the right is really misguided for doing stuff like this. The example that I'll give is their response to Twitter blocking Trump is that all of these people on the right are now canceling their Twitter accounts. Well, guess what?
Bad
That's not
idea.
that's not going to accomplish anything either. You've literally ceded the ground and have said, I'm taking my toys and going home, and you've taken yourself off the playing field, which only reinforces this echo chamber that they're creating there that proves to them that this is the right thing to do. And so it's not even just that these tech companies, the scary thing about what the tech companies are doing is not that they're doing it, but that the American people are allowing them to get away with it because so many of the American people, one, are just not interested in fighting because they don't see it as their fight. They don't want to put themselves out there for whatever reason. They're not interested in fighting, or they agree with what the tech companies are doing because they haven't been educated to understand what the slippery slope even is. I was having a conversation with a graduate student of some sort on Twitter a couple weeks ago, and I mentioned the term slippery slope, and she retweeted and she was like, "Oh, well, when you're asked a legitimate question and you respond with word salad." And I was like, the term slippery slope is not actually word salad. There is a definition of what this is. And
That's a real thing.
it essentially turned out that she had never been taught what the slippery slope was. She's in graduate school, had never been taught what this was. And so this is the problem that we're running into. And that was something that Trump was trying to trying to compensate for with the 1776 commission report, which Joe Biden, of course, threw out on day one. So we're literally not teaching people about these fundamental American values. We're not teaching them in school what all this is. And what this is leading to is private companies being more powerful than the federal government because literally no one is holding them to account.
Yep. Yeah. So there's a direction we can go with this, and I can just kind of give you the basic premise and we can go there or not. But I think there's a deeper issue to why they're not being held accountable. So if let's peel back some onion layers here, right? They're doing what they're doing because they can because they're not being held accountable. Well, why aren't they being held accountable? Well, what does it mean to hold someone accountable? I think that it means that you believe what they're doing is wrong and that they shouldn't be doing it. And if we were to kind of put a fine point on the, what they're doing is wrong kind of thing, it's an encroachment of freedom. It's an encroachment of speech. It's an encroachment of liberty. And what I think is probably a deeper issue is that the concept of liberty and freedom isn't something that people find particularly valuable in their hierarchies of what they personally want from their government or what they personally want in their own life, of what is just valuable to them as an individual. There's a reason that Franklin had that quote about the people that would give up fundamental or essential liberty for temporary safety, because he recognized even then that there's a lot of people that are more than willing to do that for whom liberty is not something that's valuable to them. Whenever you study other cultures around the world, you find that, for us, we value individualism and freedom. And there's other places that freedom wouldn't even be in their top five. It'd be like honor, family, collective community kind of thing, and so on and so forth. And the problem is that this country, which used to kind of operate with, I think, maybe freedom or liberty as one of the driving things that people saw as a means to accomplish what they needed to accomplish, was kind of at the bedrock of the values that were in this country. I mean, the idea of freedom and liberty is one of the things that drove the abolitionist movement, where they're like, wait a second, the country's founded on this, and we have this whole group of people that don't actually have freedom and liberty. Whenever Frederick Douglass talked about the Declaration of Independence, and he's like, wait a second, this doesn't mean anything to us. So in other words, here's a value that we all agree is valuable, and you're not doing it. And so this idea over time, I think probably over the last 110, 120 years, freedom and liberty has gradually descended in importance, and has probably fallen, in terms of maybe safety or security or comfort or something like that. Has gained more ascendancy than freedom and liberty. And so to your point about why they get away with it, I think that most Americans don't see it as an issue. I wrote a thing about, and then I think I did a video a little later about this article I read by it was an NBC anchor named Stephanie Ruel, who had gotten coronavirus. Mm-hmm. And her thing was, we did everything right. I mean, the article was actually really fascinating in the amount of dissonance that was in it, between probably what she believes or what she, thinks and like how she lives her life and what she's calling for. But that's not what I want to talk about. The point is that she gives this whole thing about our federal response, and she compares us to like South Korea and, some other super small country that maybe had like 5 or 12 million people. And she says they did this, all these other things. And she was describing things that would literally be illegal here because they'd be unconstitutional. And she says she has this really, I think, telling sentence. She says here, it mostly depends on personal or individual responsibility or personal responsibility. And she describes the concept of personal responsibility of the citizen as a bug. She's saying, all these places, the government can just force people to do this. And here we just depend on this personal responsibility thing. And she's lamenting this thing that's kind of embedded into the fabric of our system and into like the American experiment itself as a bug instead of a feature. And so I think my point is that idea of personal responsibility, of knowing how to seize freedom, knowing the value of freedom and the value of liberty is kind of at the bedrock of why so many people don't see it as an issue. Why, after Christchurch, for example, there are so many people that looked at what they did in New Zealand and the fact that Jacinda Ardern could just unilaterally make all these changes to gun legislation. They said, why can't we do that? It's because they are looking at safety and not liberty and not encroachment. There was an article that a friend of mine sent me in Australia that they talked about their coronavirus response and compared it to America. And they said the reason why they thought they were doing so good is because they had a fundamental belief that the government is the best at solving your problems, that the government is there as a solution. And they were almost ridiculing America as a place that didn't believe that. But what they were describing, I mean, if you're familiar with what has taken place in a lot of the places in Australia, it is incredibly authoritarian. It's stuff that, like, if even one instance of it happened here, there'd be rioting in the streets, people getting there was I don't know if you saw the video of the woman that was going to, even just on Facebook, shared a post about attending an anti-lockdown protest on Facebook, and the police came into her house
I did see
and
that.
arrested her.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and there are places where you could not even go, like, leave your house to go exercise by yourself in your yard. You couldn't take your dog out to take a crap in your own yard. Like, that's how bad it was in some places. But there are people here who go, yeah, and, whereas I hear that, and, I assume you hear that and go, no, hell no, absolutely not. Like, there's no way that would happen. But the fact that there are so many people who go, and it's the same, and it's that same mindset is my point, that whenever they look at the stuff with the tech, and they're like, yeah, but it's hate speech. Look at some of the polling data, especially on younger people, about what their concept of hate speech and what should be done about hate speech. And it's very telling about how, like, yeah, hate speech shouldn't be allowed. So if you have this news establishment that labels everything they disagree with hate speech, and you have this reinforced narrative, this accepted narrative about dissenting views as hate speech, they're not going to care, is my point. And so to go back up the onion, they're not going to see it as an issue, so they're not going to hold them accountable. So Twitter is going to be able to do that, so they're going to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. And frankly, the only way that they even get a wake-up call at that point is when it starts happening to them.
Yep. And that's exactly right. And that's unfortunate, because another way of saying that is that it's when it comes for them. It's whenever they get silenced. It's whenever something happens there. Now, if you're the type of person who always just goes along with the crowd, you're probably not at risk of that happening. Or if you're a true believer, if you're someone who has been brainwashed into this stuff, again, talking about every year we get more and more of that coming out of the higher education system, then yeah, we're going to increasingly run into people who it's not going to come for them. It's not going to be an issue. Now, the one exception that I would say that is maybe a bright spot there, and I know this isn't tech specific, but it's in that same realm, is like, so look at, how the lockdowns and stuff that happened in California, of people who did everything right, that were, Democrats and all this other stuff, who adapted their businesses and then still experienced all this crap happening from, there's I don't know where it's at now. I think Gavin Newsom is trying to hopefully fight off that, the push to what were they going to do
Recall him. They're
to
recalling
recall
his
him?
ass.
By lifting some of the restrictions, and so I think that there are ways in which people wake up to that overarching thing about freedom. Again, that's a different realm that's like business and, their own like personal freedom of movement. But the concept still applies, where I think that whenever they do run into it, they're like, wait a second, what? And it only takes one thing. I think James Lindsay calls it the woke breaking point, where, it just takes like one thing for them to go, wait a second, hold on. Like, that, like for me, for example, whenever, like, this was probably in 2014, that one of the things that first started me like thinking about this stuff was, I originally was pre-law, and then I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer, but I had a lot of that ingrained in me, and, political science was my major. And so whenever the BLM stuff started happening, if the report on the news, if I saw white cop shoots black suspect, therefore racism, I was like, well, maybe, but we don't have any information. How could we possibly assume that? It very well could be, but it just seems weird that we're going to jump to that. And so like, that was what it was for me. But my point is, I think everyone has that, like you said, that, whenever it comes to for them, then they will wake up to it. The question always in my mind when it comes to this is how much damage is going to be done, how much power is going to be there before enough people wake up to it, before enough people have that happen to them that is necessary to fight back against it.
Right. And I want to build off that point, and I want to go back to the whole idea, and we glossed over it so quickly, but I see people talking about it in the chat, and this is something that really pisses me off. So I want to address it very directly about why you don't leave the battlefield. And I'm looking specifically at like all these people who are deactivating their Twitter accounts because they're pissed that Twitter purged hundreds of thousands of people. And I'm going to call someone out. I'm going to call out Atticus in the chat, who's advocating for this. I'm going to call out Laura Ann in the chat, who's saying, why help these organizations make money when their profits try to destroy us? This is what people do not understand about this. They do not want you on their platforms. The reason that they are purging accounts is because they do not want you there. Every single and you are playing right into their hands when you opt out on your own. You are not costing them anything. I don't know why people think that they are doing so much damage to Twitter by deactivating their accounts when you're not costing them anything. It costs you resources to be on their platform, and you can say, well, either it's going to cost them advertising money for you to leave. No. You're doing what they want you to do. You are allowing them to win. And when I say I want people to stand up and fight, I do not believe that leaving the battlefield entirely is the correct way to fight. I think that's taking your toys and going home. And this is exactly what they want you to do. They want to create Twitter as a left-wing echo chamber without any pushback from everywhere. So congratulations. If you deleted your Twitter account, you deactivated your Twitter account because you were pissed, you allowed them to win. That is what they wanted you to do. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think so. I agree with you. Let me add like another like level to that. So to Atticus and to, was it Lauren or Laura?
Laura, I believe.
Yeah. So to Atticus and Laura, I think it is, in all fairness, I do think it is a valid question for people to say, why should we stay? And you just kind of answered that in a sense, like, yeah, it makes sense for people to go, why should we be a part of this? It's abusive in a way. They are profiting off of our presence. And so it's a valid question, but Carlin, your point's exactly right, that we are ceding the ground to them. And let me just point out one implication of doing that, of ceding that ground. And this is something, I think that we'll probably get into here a little bit later, but one of the ways in which this ideology wins, one of the ways in which it's able to consistently be abusive is through caricaturing the opposition and through dehumanizing the opposition. And so whenever, like, the fewer people there are that are in that environment with them, that are real people like you and me and anyone else who are not just the alt-right Nazi, bigot, QAnon, whatever thing that they paint us to be, but that are actual real human beings, the fewer there are, the more, like, the easier it is to buy into that caricaturing of us, and easy to go along with that. What I was talking about, that dehumanizing and charged language that's become so normalized over the last 4 years. The reason it's so easy for people to do that is because they don't have regular exposure to the people that they're actually talking about. And so, like, for example, I thought I had earlier, even while we were talking about the Twitter thing, is, I told you I had a legitimate Twitter mobbing, like, that was really bad. Like, I've got a bunch of my YouTube videos are now super ratioed from people that went from the Twitter thing to my YouTube, all because I was just criticizing something AOC said. And some guy retweeted me and was, crapping all over me and, my humble account, and that's fine. And I legitimately experienced it. But one thing that did happen, it was a sea of crap and it sucked. It wasn't fun. But I did have a few conversations with people who said, well, what did you mean by this? And I said, this is what I mean. We agree here. I'm upset about this misrepresentation, but the premise I totally agree with. And I had a handful of conversations. People said, okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. Fair enough. Yeah. And so, like, are those few and far between? Sure. But are 100% of my interactions on Twitter with, toxic, caricatures of the other side? Not at all. I've had productive conversations with people. And so, is it hard to stick around in that environment? Yeah, it is. It certainly is. And so, and is it valid to ask, why should we stay? I think it's a valid question. But what happens that really concerns me if we leave is that we allow for them to, if you were to look at how the news or anything, characterizes people that they disagree with, it's increasingly getting more and more charged, more and more moral, I guess, using these moral dichotomies. I had a few screenshots from some CNN articles I wanted to read you at some point, but of how I'm just seeing this language getting more and more in this language of venom and poison and dunking. And it's really dehumanizing language. And it's very difficult to dehumanize a person who's in front of you. It's difficult to dehumanize a person who's a real person, who's really talking to you and trying to find common ground. But it's really easy to dehumanize someone who's not there, someone who's not present. And so whenever we leave Twitter, we cede the ground to them to continue in this echo chamber, not just of their ideas, but their ideas of who we are, of who people who disagree with them are, however you want to describe we. I'm not saying all of us in the we agree on everything, but they have a view of people who they disagree with. And it's increasingly becoming more and more like these are the evil, like, white nationalists, insurrectionists that are domestic terrorists, all this other stuff. And it makes it harder for them to do that if we're there. So that would be my answer to that. I mean, there's a lot of reasons so that we can engage in the battle of ideas, because not everyone, I think that Twitter is increasingly becoming people that are probably immovable in their ideology, but I don't think everyone there is immovable in their ideology. And it's a battle worth fighting, I guess, is my point. I've said I'm going to be there until they kick me off, because we have to be there to represent, to give a human side to the opposition and to just represent these ideas until they force us or they make it where we can't do otherwise.
Yeah, and you're being very diplomatic, and I want to compliment you for that. I am not that diplomatic on this issue. I think that this is a time where people need to find their big boy and girl pants, and they need to fight back where they can. And I think being on Twitter where they don't want you to be, people think they're costing them these advertising dollars. Like, the thing that they care about the most is the money. If they cared about the money, folks, they wouldn't have banned Donald Trump off the platform. Like, P.S. If money was the most important thing, they would not have banned Donald Trump off the platform. So you think you're attacking them where they care. You are not. You are attacking the wrong thing. Right? And I will be the very first person. I will call anyone who leaves Twitter because I'm taking my toys and going home. I think you're a coward. I do. I think you're a coward, and I think that you are forcing people like me to stay and fight for you and to continue to have your back. I'm literally shadow banned right now on Twitter. If you are not logged into your account and you go to search for me, you will not find me. You will find my stupid imposter account right now before you find my account, right? I'm shadow banned on Twitter. I have lost over 13,000 followers or something like that in the purges, and I'm still there fighting every single day. So if you aren't going to put on your big boy and girl pants and stay and fight, then so far as I'm concerned, you are a coward. You are not in the fight. You are not useful to me, and I will have absolutely no sympathy for you. If you aren't willing to do the little things, I don't expect you to do the big things. So you can go run along off to Gab or whatever other echo chamber you want to, and I will stay and fight on your behalf, because that is what you are forcing me to do. You are useless in this battle. And I think everyone who wants to be in this battle needs to actually stand up and do something about it instead of just complaining on the internet. So that's my very undiplomatic response. But Truman is much nicer than I am.
We can good cop, bad cop that, I suppose. That's fine. What the one thing I will say is, how about this? Would you say, what if someone said, I don't want to be on Twitter, but I'm actively fighting back in my workplace?
I don't believe them for one red second.
Okay,
I
fair enough.
don't. I don't, because I think that if, again, like, Twitter is the easy thing, right? You can create an anonymous account on Twitter. You don't even have to be
Fair enough.
yourself,
That's right.
you
Twitter is
know?
an easy thing. And that goes back to what I said earlier about how it sucks. Most people shouldn't have to do this because they're not interested in it. So that's totally fair. And, you know, I agree with your general point of, like, and to what you just said, I think that's totally true. It's like, and this is something we've seen people say for a while now. You know, the people, you know, Dave Rubin, I think, is increasingly pissed about this, where he's like, there are people who are saying, I'm so glad you're doing this because I'm afraid to speak out. He's like, it shouldn't just be me. Like, we all have to do this. And so whenever you're saying you're leaving me to fight for you because you're not willing to do it, and I think that's a fair point, you know, and to what I said earlier, whatever the reasons are, it sucks, but this is what's being asked of us right now, even if it's something as stupid as being on Twitter, you know, like, it does matter. Just like, how about this? I think we could agree on this. A person who disagrees presence on Twitter is much more impactful and meaningful than their absence from Twitter in terms of like directing the conversation, directing things. So I think that's totally right. We'll good cop, bad cop it, but I think we generally agree people need to have some skin in the game and get, or they have skin in the game. They need to get in the game.
Yeah.
So fair enough.
And it's like, I mean, it's just the excuses that bother me. If I'm gonna take a personal moment here, Truman. It's the excuses that bother me, because I hear people, I'm seeing people in the chat complaining and saying they censor us, they ban us, I get in trouble for this, I get in trouble for that. Dude, I lost my entire family and my friends and sources of income and gave up half a year of my life to travel around the country doing rallies fighting for you guys. And you can't keep an open Twitter account? Please. I have no patience, because I think that it's important that people start realizing that if you are not actively doing something right now, and this is why this is important. This is not just me bitching and complaining. This
No,
is like, if you are not actively doing something to fight back against this, and I'm not talking about being a keyboard warrior, which is what, you know, a lot of people do on Twitter, but, you know, I'm not just talking about that. Like, you are playing into what they want. You are part of the problem, so far as I'm concerned. I think there are three groups of people right now. There are people that are actively acting as authoritarians and trying to put all the entire population under their thumb to do what they want them to do, say what they want them to say, use the words they want them to use, do these stupid diversity trainings, whatever. That's group A. I think we have group B, which is the largest group in the middle, of people who are they don't agree with the authoritarians, but they're not doing anything about it. They're not speaking up. They're afraid of losing their jobs or what have you. And then I think there's another group on the other side of people like you and I that are actively trying to do what we can do to fight back against this. And we're doing it across a variety of different platforms in a variety of different ways. That's fine. But right now, my patience is diminishing with the people sitting in the middle that are saying, like, I don't agree with them, but I'm not going to do anything about it, or I'm just going to go off into my echo chamber and just try to pretend it's not happening. My patience with them is quickly diminishing, because there are a lot of people. Oh, you haven't guessed? Because I've only been in this fight for like a couple of years now. I already feel like I'm carrying a burden for so many other people that are going to experience a benefit from it. If we are not, or if we are successful, they are going to experience the benefit, but they haven't done a damn thing to get there. And I'm okay with carrying a bigger burden than most people are, but it's exhausting. And it feels, when people are like, oh, just don't do that, just leave, you don't have to say anything, you know, we understand that your job's on the line and all this stuff. Like, it's not acknowledging that they are not actively doing anything to stop this, which for me is becoming the same thing as you are allowing it to happen.
Sure. And I think there's probably something to be said for the fact that the average person, so I will speak even a little bit from my lens. I am incredibly overwhelmed and fight. Like one of my biggest fights just personally is, kind of a nihilistic apathy and cynicism of like, it doesn't matter. It's too big. We can't win kind of thing. And I have to fight that, to be honest, a lot. And so I can see how a lot of those people are going, it doesn't matter. Like what impact can I have? And I think the point that you're making is them doing something is better than them doing nothing. And that like we can make a difference, even if it's something, like I said earlier, like you even being on Twitter or just being there as that immovable object, until they force you otherwise is much more meaningful than doing nothing. And I think the average person feels that same thing of like, this thing is so big. What can I do? I'm just a whatever, my job is. I'm just one person. And I think they lose sight of the fact that they're not alone. Like what you said, but us bowing out is what they want. It makes it seem like they're winning. And another way, I think you said something the other day that ties into this. The opposite of if what they want is us checking out, that means what they don't want is us sticking around. And if they don't want it, like what you said the other day, is it means they're afraid of it. It means that it's something concerning to them. And so that means that the average person who is like, what could I do? My present doesn't matter. It does matter. They are afraid of you sticking around. They are afraid of you being there. They want you to be demoralized. They want you to sit this out. They want you to take your ball and go home because they know that if you stick around, that's an obstacle to them. And the more people that stick around, that's the more obstacles that they're going to encounter. And so like, yeah, like we have to fight that collective, nihilism and apathy. And by the way, I know it's easier to do that. It's easier to check out because in the short term, yeah, I think most people won't feel the penalty of, what happens as this thing takes over. But that doesn't mean they won't eventually feel it. And so like maybe they just need to be reminded in some cases, again, maybe this is me doing the good cop thing, but I think they need to be reminded that their presence does matter. They can make a difference. Every single person can make a difference. You wrote a Medium article. You wrote a freaking Medium article, right? Like that's how these things happen. And so people cannot ever underestimate the power of just themselves standing up and saying like, no, or being a part of it, or something as simple as maintaining a Twitter account to engage it in something, even if it's minuscule, because the opposite is what they want. The opposite is you leaving. And that's what they want. What they don't want is you to stick around and be a part of that. And that shows that even Jack Dorsey and the tech machine is afraid of people like us whenever we actually stick around and are willing to fight for these things.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. They do not want you there. They do not care if they lose advertising money. They do not, that is not their highest priority. Jack Dorsey's highest priority is maintaining his space in the way that he wants to maintain it. You guys got to understand. And Twitter is not the end all be all. Twitter is not going to change the world. But this is like a little microcosm of the larger problem that I see with people who prefer to actively opt out rather than to fight back. And I think that the larger point I want to make is that if you are not in the battle fighting for free speech in places that are not right-wing echo chambers where everyone doesn't, like if you're fighting the free speech battle on Gab, congratulations, everyone else agrees with you. You are literally like and I'm on Gab. I'm enjoying Gab. I actually think that Gab, once they have now that they've kind of stabilized, Gab is actually a pretty cool platform. I'm enjoying it. I think that it has a lot of potential. I mean, even just the functionality of it is a lot better than Twitter in some respects. But you are going to convince a grand total of 0 people to change their minds on Gab. It accomplishes nothing. Parler is exactly the same way. I think Parler is a crappy platform. I do hope it comes back because, I don't think it should have been taken down in the first place. But we win nothing on Parler. I would even say the same thing about Locals. And I'm a big fan of Locals. I'm on Locals. You're on Locals. We love Locals. It's like social media for adults. But guess what? The whole idea behind Locals is that you are in a community of like-minded people. And that's the whole point of it. It's creating these niche communities of like-minded people. You are probably not going to win anything being on locals, the places that we can start to win people over. And I think that the free speech argument and the censorship argument is actually one of the most compelling things that's happened, because people on the left understand that. They
Yep.
understand the importance of free speech. They understand the importance of the First Amendment. And I actually, more than any other thing that's happened in the last year, when that happened, when Twitter purged hundreds of thousands of people from their platform, including the president of the United States, I got messages from people who I hadn't talked to in months or even maybe years since all this happened, who said, "Carlin, I know we don't agree on politics right now, but this is really concerning to me." Well, guess what? If I had opted out of Twitter, I never would have gotten those messages. And that was the only place that I was able to actually have conversations with people to say, "I told you this was coming, and here's what happens next."
Yep. Yeah. No, I mean that I agree with you. Yeah. I mean, that's back to that, kind of preaching to the choir versus evangelizing thing. All those places you're describing are places where we're preaching to the choir as opposed to, being out among the people who we have to win over. And we can't do that if we're not with them. Right. And so, yeah, Twitter is just one example of that, but I think you're exactly right about that. So do you want to, where do you want to go from here? Because there's a few things I'm thinking about in terms of like COVID, in terms of federal stuff, in terms of social stuff. Like we can kind of go wherever you want.
Well, I think we've been on for about 90 minutes at this point, so maybe this is a good time, and this is actually a good transition into this, is that one of the things that we talked about the other day is that the thing that the establishment fears probably most is unity.
Yep.
What they fear, and we're seeing this is probably a good time to talk about GameStop, right? Because what we're seeing with GameStop is, for the first time, really, we're seeing the populist left and the populist right come together around something that I think that they all pretty much have agreement on, which
Yep.
is that those hedge fund guys are getting their comeuppance.
Yeah. F those guys. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing that's going to scare the most people. And again, this is the thing that can't happen on Gab and can't happen on Parler when it comes back, because like these are two ideologies that are saying we've got a lot of differences, but on this we agree. So Truman, why is the establishment so worried about a populist left and populist right coming together?
Yeah. So they're afraid of unity. Well, first off, for people who don't know what happened with GameStop, let's at least give like a brief kind of synopsis of why this is kind of important. So GameStop, what happened is that there was a group on Reddit that's of people who are just average traders who do this at home, who trade in like stocks, average investors. And some of them, I think one person noticed that GameStop's stock, 88% of it was a short position, which is another way of saying I'm betting that the company will fail. When you take out a short, you profit if the company fails.
Mm-hmm.
And they noticed that, like, okay, 88% of this thing, I think is what the number, if I recall right, was a short position, but there's no reason. And so what these hedge funders do is they collaborate with, the media and with each other to, like, they're not adding value to the market. They are saying, okay, we're going to take out these positions on this company and try to intentionally drive the stock down so that the company can fail and will profit off these short positions. And so they're betting against the company, and they do this. They're not adding anything. They're just making money off of the failure of others, oftentimes something that they themselves manufactured. And so this group on Reddit realized that they could actually make a lot of money by betting on GameStop, by taking out stocks on GameStop. And so over the course of, I believe it was a couple of weeks, whenever they first started, GameStop stock was about $20 a share. And as it picked up more and more steam, the price went up and up and up and up. And I believe the last I heard, it was somewhere around like $230 something a share. And what it did is it hurt these hedge funders that were betting on it going down. I think that one of the main companies, I can't remember who it was, but they had to have an injection of between $2 and $3 million into their company just to make up the losses that they had from GameStop's stock going up. And what we saw in response, Sagar and Jetty did a really great radar on this on the Hill yesterday. what we saw is all of a sudden people on Wall Street are calling for regulation. They're colluding. Surely this has got to be, well, how dare the average person try to fight the system and make us pay. And like, I believe they had one of the money TV shows had the CEO of the NASDAQ on to talk about this, and they were all pissed off. I think there was another guy who said, we don't know, this wasn't foreign interference. And what we see, I know, right? But what we're seeing here is, something that I laid out in this piece I wrote before the election about what's at stake. And one of the things I said in that was, this isn't a left versus right thing. It's an establishment left versus everyone else thing. And what we saw is the establishment that is used to this system. Whenever you're talking about, they want us to be distracted, they want us, to be, picking at each other so they can continue to just make money. I mean, the housing market, what happened there is a good example. All of the companies that got ridiculous amounts of money off of the CARES Act and the recent stimulus packages is another example. And that they're pissed off about it, and that they now all of a sudden they want regulation, not whenever they collude and do this stuff literally all the time, basically as their business model. But when average people who maybe made a couple grand off of GameStop stock cost them or show them that they can stick it to them. I mean, it's a really a very small example of what happened with Trump and why the reaction to Trump was so visceral, because he was a finger in the eye of the establishment, and they were like, F those plebes, how dare they challenge us? We're the moral betters of society. Why would they reject us? And what happened with the GameStop thing is another example of that, of the establishment going, wait a second, this isn't what everyday Americans are supposed to be doing. This is our thing. We're the ones who get to profit off the system. How dare they profit off the system? And, one thing that does unite the left and the right in a lot of ways is a distrust of big things and of corporations, and to see that, that these people profiteer off of us, and often off of our own inaction and distraction with, each other and whatever other, stupid thing is of the day. And so I think it was a really cool thing to see how these people on Wall Street were panicking, saying, oh, now we need regulation. Surely something has to be done off of these people on Reddit. And I mean, it's humorous, but it's also alarming because, again, to use the Trump thing, I think on a macro level, we saw the establishment coalesce in rejection of their own rejection. And that's why they didn't learn anything from Trump. They just doubled down on their antipathy and their antagonism towards, everyday regular people. And they won through that coalescence. And so I think that the GameStop thing is, they don't learn from this. They're not going, maybe we shouldn't be, artificially devaluing companies by betting against them, even if they're perfectly fine companies. We just have to fight against the people that won't let us do that, because they don't have the humility, to actually do some self-assessment about why they're, giant pieces of shit profiteering off of the rest of us. So obviously I have no strong feelings about Wall Street, but anyway, I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, I mean, but like, I think it paints to the broader issue though. And this is something I've been thinking about for a couple weeks now, probably, in that I think that right now there is a golden opportunity for populists on the left and populists on the right to unite. Because if there's one thing that is very, very clear to me that Donald Trump, bless his heart, brought out in everything, is that he showed us that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, the people who are not on board with Trump, it's the average everyday, they're the same. They are exactly the same fucking party. They are only in it for themselves. They only care about serving themselves and the people that donate to them. That is all that they care about. They do not care about the American people at all. And Donald Trump brought that out really, really overtly, where it was obvious. And I think especially, we already knew that kind of like with the Democratic Party. And I think most of us more or less knew it about like the Republican Party, that was what they cared about. But when we learned that Mitch McConnell was the one who talked Trump out of pardoning Julian Assange, that to me, oh, you didn't know that?
I did not know that. Is that confirmed? Like, do we know that for sure?
That's. I mean, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, because Mitch McConnell basically told Trump, if you pardon Julian Assange, then we are going to convict you in the impeachment trial.
Is that real? Like,
Yes,
are you serious?
that's real. Yes, that's real.
Send me the information on that, because that is insane. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
Cassandra Fairbanks was talking a lot about that, and that was obviously like her thing, and she was pissed about that. Yeah. So I mean, and even just the fact that this whole charade is continuing to go on, and that there are literally Republicans voting to proceed with this impeachment trial as though it's not completely unconstitutional, absurd. Anyway, I don't want to get into all that. Like, but this is just all proof that these
Yep.
two parties are literally exactly the same. And if we look on the Democratic side, guess who's really pissed at Joe Biden? Black Lives Matter, because he
Yep.
hasn't talked to them at all, has not taken one meeting with Black Lives Matter since
Yep.
he won the election. So they're pissed too. And so we've got this really overt thing where it is now very, very clear who the government works for, and it ain't for us on
Nope.
either side. It doesn't matter what side you're on. It is not for you. And so I see an opportunity, and this is actually something that's happened before. This happened, I want to say, oh gosh, I'm going to get the date wrong, but like back in the 70s with the Rainbow Coalition, when the Black Panthers combined forces with legitimate white supremacists. And this happened in Chicago. Is like they teamed up and they combined forces. And in doing so, guess what happened? The white supremacists became a little less white supremacists because they realized that the Black Panthers weren't exactly who they thought they were, and they maybe had more in common than they thought they did. I think that there's an opportunity for this to happen now again. And I think that terrifies the establishment more
Absolutely.
than any other possibility.
Yeah. So this last summer, I was listening to a lot of Rage Against the Machine, and that's actually whenever I first had the thought of, how the counterculture has become the establishment. The way I word it is those who once raged have become the machine. But there is this song that they have that I was listening to the other day. Just want to read you this one lyric. And this song, so the album, it's their self-titled album in '92. And the song's called Know Your Enemy. And at the end, he says, yes, I know my enemies. They're the teachers who taught me to fight me. Compromise, conformity, assimilation, submission, ignorance, brutality, the elite, all of which are American dreams. And the point of the song is you have to know who your actual enemy is, that there is this elite establishment that wants us to fight each other, that wants us to just conform, to go along with the prevailing narratives. And in the course of doing that, they win by us being able to, or by us not being able to identify what the actual enemy is. And again, I don't like that language of enemy, but I do like maybe something more as an antagonist or an opposing force to the good of the citizenry. And so the fact that they know that they're not operating in our best interest, a few examples from recent time when Nancy Pelosi made it obvious that she stalled stimulus talks. Now, I'm not one who's in favor of stimulus personally, but that she stalled that for political reasons exclusively. That's an example of she's not operating in the best interest of Americans. Or when there was that call with Gavin Newsom and the people in California, I can't remember exactly what it was, but where the guy who was they're talking about why they weren't doing outdoor dining. And he said it had nothing to do with coronavirus. And they didn't want people to have a reason to leave the house. So it wasn't about safety. It was just about keeping people.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah. And he came right out and said it. Said, yeah, this isn't about safety. It's about, we don't want people to have a reason to leave the house and therefore might catch coronavirus. And so they were lying. It wasn't the best interest of the people. It was just, or the business owners specifically who converted their businesses or the restaurants to be able to work outside. And so those are the same establishment groups that want us, like what I mentioned earlier about the caricatures of each other. They want us to see the other side as, whether if you're on the left, to see the other side as alt-right, bigots, Nazis, insurrectionists, whatever, white supremacists. And if you're on the right, there is an establishment that wants you to think everyone who disagrees with you on every economic policy is a communist that wants to take over the country, or that actually believes in CRT and, that is a true believer in all of these different things and is into the Green New Deal and whatever else. And as long as we're fighting each other, we're not fighting them. We're not knowing our enemy or our antagonist. And, again, the lesson of Donald Trump is that outsiders who do unite, those who recognize what the real opposition to us is, and, in his case, you talk about the swamp and the establishment, that can happen. Bernie Sanders is another example. I think Bernie rolled over too soon. But whatever. But the point is that they still had to cater to his support base because they're afraid of it, and they understand that. Again, those of us, I was thinking about this. I've got a person who lives somewhat near me who's a hardcore socialist and has all of those signs in their yard, and they've got the signs, in this house we believe, and here's a bunch of platitudes, right?
Yeah.
That person is less of an antagonist in my life than I'll use, let's say, someone in the establishment news. Let's go Anderson Cooper, who did the thing about how people who are even at the Capitol, like you, can go back to the Holiday Inns and the Olive Gardens. And Anderson Cooper is not operating in the best interest of people. And by the way, Olive Garden's delicious, but
Olive Garden is delicious, and I was staying at the Hilton, Anderson Cooper.
Okay. Well, but my point is that there is nothing redeeming in what the establishment is doing, and I say that carefully because I understand that is the same kind of moral rhetoric that I don't like whenever the establishment does it. But I'm open to arguments that there is something redeeming in the establishment class of what they're doing. I'm open to arguments that they're operating in our best interest on purpose, as opposed to, I think when it happens, it's mostly on accident, or it goes along with something that more serves them. So, $600 checks for Americans while they fund whatever other bullshit that they want to fund, including the corporations that they sit on the boards on and hold large amounts of stock in. I'm open to arguments that the establishment legacy media is, if you're going to say, put on the scales, doing good, doing harm to the country. I'm open to arguments that they're doing good. I think the way I would steelman that is we do get information about what's going on in the world. Whenever Christchurch happened, we found out about it, from the news. When a hurricane hits, we find out about it. So we do need ways to stay connected and know what's going on. But by and large, the type of rhetoric they're injecting into the social fabric on purpose, with complete disregard for the harm it's doing, is a overwhelmingly net negative. And they're doing it because they make money off of our division. So our unity isn't profitable to them from a purely financial standpoint. And our unity is a threat to their power, to their establishment power. And so, we have to know our enemy. We have to know, are there people, by the way, around us, everyday people that, might be true believers and might be, real opposition to things that are good? Sure, of course. I'm not naive to that. But I would say overwhelming, in sum, the overwhelming threat that we face to our lives in this country, to our ability to live our lives, to our freedoms, is this establishment that largely wants us to hate each other. And so because of that, I think that the only way we win is to fight against what they want, which is to be distracted by red balloons, to think that we can, back to the Twitter thing or to the Reddit GameStop thing, to even have hope that we can fight them. We have to do all of those things and unite and fight like hell to find common ground with people we disagree with. It's a lot easier to demonize people. That's the other problem. It's a lot easier. It's significantly harder to humanize those, but I think we have to really fight hard to do that. And if we do, then we will be the threat that they know that we can be. Yeah. I don't know how to end what I just said there.
No, I think you ended it perfectly, just fine. Now, there is a super chat from Cindy that I want to bring up. Says he's talking about the Great Reset. That's why we've been locking everything down, trying to ruin the middle class to be ruled by elites. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I also want to say that I really think that all of this Great Reset talk, I think it's a red balloon. I do. And not to say that we shouldn't worry about globalism, but I think the way that it's framed, it's going to be it's like the playground for conspiracy theorists. Now that Q is over, now that we need to move on to the next thing, and the Great Reset's going to be the next thing. And so it's one of those things where is there truth to it? Yes, of course there is, but I really think it's a red balloon. What do you think?
No, I think you're right. I think two things can be true at once. So let's use an example that people might not like as much. Were there people at the Capitol who absolutely thought they were engaged in an insurrection to overthrow the country? Sure,
Yeah.
probably. I know there was a guy I saw who interviewed an actual Nazi who was there. So is it true to say that there were people who wanted to overthrow the country that were there and that there were actual Nazis there? Yes. Is it also true that that is like 10 people
Yeah.
and does not even come close to scratching the surface of the totality of the mindset and goals that were represented there? Yeah, that's also true. So I think with the Great Reset thing, are there people who want to do that? Of course there are. Of course there are. There's always going to be crazy assholes, who have power and are looking to consolidate more of it. And they can find other crazy friends that, they can sit and plot and scheme and do stuff with. Sure. Is that the biggest thing right now? Probably not. Is it something we should keep our eye on? Probably. I think it would be foolish to not. But is it the most pressing thing? No, I don't think so. I think that it is a distraction. My thought is if there's like a grand scheme to do something, the odds of me being able to find a YouTube video about it are probably pretty small. Like there was a guy who I once, I was talking to, and he was, a bit of a conspiracy theorist, and I was stuck in a situation where we were both working together. So I had to hear all of it. And he was telling me about this YouTube channel that like exposes all of the, the people controlling the world. And I'm like, so your theory is that if there is an elite group of people who assassinate their opposition and secretly pull the strings, and it's like 20 people that have that much power, they're going to let YouTube videos about it be out there? He's like, well, yeah, but they want you to think it's crazy. I'm like, okay, I mean, we can go pretty meta. I suppose there's something to that, but like, probably not. Like, that the scheme, the odds of there being something this elaborate and us having the blueprint for it now are pretty small. So I'm sure that there is something to the Great Reset. I'm sure there are people who are actually totally trying to do exactly what it is that we think it is. But I don't think that that's like the main thing right now. And I think, and the other way I would word it is, the main things that we have to be working to oppose right now, I think would also be putting in place the things that would oppose whatever that is. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's the same. It goes the same thing by opposing the CRT stuff, by opposing the establishment control, by opposing, this far left orthodoxy as it takes over all of our institutions. I think it also is another way of opposing those who would, implement that Great Reset. So I guess it's a win-win, I suppose. But yeah, I think your general point that, is it a distraction? I think probably, for the most part, or at least it's operating as a distraction, right? Mm-hmm. That is serving as a distraction for a lot of people whose energy could probably be put towards more pressing matters in the immediacy.
Well, and that's really the thing is like, here is what I think is going to happen, and what we've already started to see happening, frankly. I think that there are a lot of people who, again, are probably prone to be more into conspiracy theories than I am, that are going to spend all of their time and energy getting sucked down the Great Reset rabbit hole and looking for evidence of the Great Reset and creating videos about the Great Reset and creating memes about the Great Reset and like all the different things, and they aren't going to do a damn thing when it comes to basic, just like pushing back on censorship, saying this is not okay, say like speaking out when one of their friends gets banned or what have you. They're not going to do it. And this is why the small things are so important to me, and why when I'm looking for allies in this particular fight, I look for people who are doing the small things. I look for people who are showing up every day, pushing back, making videos on YouTube, like talking about things that are practical and actionable in the real world. Because if you can't do the small things, you probably aren't going to do the big things. And so the Great Reset is like this. I'm sure it's fun to think about. I'm sure for people who like putting puzzles together and all these things, like it's a good way to spend some time. Is it actively going to change anything in the real world? No. And it's going to make the rest of us look crazy in the process.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right. People that are, if you're faithful in the small things, you'll be faithful in the big things. And so yeah, I think at the end of the day, we only have so much time and energy and mental energy that we can put towards things. And so we have to ask ourselves, is this the most effective, use of our time? And, maybe for some people that's it. Like I said, is it worth keeping an eye on? Yeah, sure. But I think for most people, probably not. Like, we need to be, you gotta crawl before you can walk. And so, for most people, it's something like you said earlier, which is just maintaining a Twitter account or something. Yep. Can I say something about, like, we had talked about this before, like, or the other day, but something for people to kind of be on the lookout for that kind of ties into all of this, whenever we were saying, like, maybe what people should be watching for or looking for that ties into this.
Can I just do a few quick super chats real quick, because they're about to fly off my screen if I don't do them? Okay,
screen, man.
Let me do a couple of them. And guys, I'm sorry if I didn't bring your super chat on the screen. I missed some of them earlier, but I do want to get a couple of these. Chief says, just joined your locals. This live stream is fire, and your previous one with Dawn. Yeah, guys, if you didn't see the live stream with Dawn yesterday, who went back to college as, like, in her 40s and found all sorts of crazy shit, definitely check that out, because it was really, really, really good. Emily L. Truman, this one's for you. Truman, you have a new subscriber. I was looking forward to watching more. Also, I mistook you for Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi. So, guys, if you are, and I want to say, Vault Dwellers know what Unity means. Thank you, Mandatory Carry. So if you guys are not yet subscribed to Truman's YouTube channel, then his information is in the description below. Please go give him a subscribe. It's well worth it. He's, again, like, a really, really smart dude. I won't say he's the smartest person I know, but he knows a lot of stuff. Okay, so make sure you subscribe to him, and if you're enjoying this talk, make sure you hit that like button to let YouTube know that we're not just screwing around. Okay, Truman, go ahead.
Yeah, and first off, the Vault Dweller thing, I don't know if that guy was making a Fallout reference or not, but I love the Fallout video games. So if he was, good job. If not, then I don't know what the hell you're talking about. But yeah, so, and also thank you for that, the kind words. But the thought that I had was, there are a lot of things, like we talked the other day, there's a lot of noise out there, and there are so many things vying for our attention, vying for our energy, vying for our emotions, and our efforts. And, I can't tell you what you have to be doing or what you should be doing or what you should be paying attention to, but I'll just tell you one of the main things that's kind of on my radar right now. We talk about, well, let me ask you this. Whenever you think of the word red pilled, what does red pilled, like, mean to you? I think it means a lot of things to a lot of different people, but, like, what do you think red pill?
I think how my favorite definition of red pill is it's really kind of going directly on Matrix analogy and saying, like, you wake up and you see the world as it really is, rather than what the media wants you to think it is, I suppose. And you see that the media are the real enemy in all of this for me. So sometimes people say red pill and they mean it like, oh, you're going to vote for, well, I mean, they used to define it as like, you're going to vote for Trump or you're going to become a Republican. That's not how I use it. I think it's about waking up and seeing the world as it really is.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's at least, also for me, of seeing through the established narratives, seeing through, like, what we're told that we should believe and accept, and seeing it for what it really is, and seeing the players for who they really are. And that includes the people who we're told are our opponents, seeing that we actually have more in common with them, and so on and so forth. The one thing that I've been kind of adding to my thought of what it means to be red pilled is I'm really trying to key into the people who it seems like their goal is to get me to hate. Like, their goal is to get me to feel like anger and animosity and division, like, really specifically, like, anytime I'm seeing someone who's dehumanizing others, even if it's someone who I would maybe not agree with at all, I'm really trying to, like, do what I said earlier, which is to fight like hell to humanize and to find commonality, even if it's with people who I'm not talking to, even if it's just in my own mind of, like, I don't want to be listening to anyone who it seems like their primary goal is to get me to hate other people and to get me to fear my fellow citizens. And again, that's not to say there aren't people out there who are bad actors, that there isn't people who are burning down buildings, who are trying to incite violence, that were, throwing firebombs at, the federal courthouse, and Chaz Chop, like, those kinds of things. Like, I understand that it's not like every person in the population is, either red pilled or some blue pilled sheep, or something like that. I get that. I apply the nuance appropriately, but my point is that overwhelmingly, we can be mad at the people who are generally misinformed and generally have good intentions. Back to our conversation about emotional abuse, I think the majority of people that are functioning as emotional abusers when it comes to this far left orthodoxy are good intentioned. I think they're just misinformed and they don't know what they're doing. And so I can be mad at them because they're inconveniencing my life or frustrating me. I can be mad at them because it's maybe a friend that I care about and I don't like that they're believing lies or something like that. Or I can be mad at the people who lied to them. I can be mad at the people who are the ones who created this propaganda in the first place, who infiltrated higher ed and the establishment media and now tech that is creating that is sowing that. Again, I think one of the biggest eye openers for me was to look at the media post Trump, even just right away, and to really ask the question, how much of the chaos that people perceived about the Trump presidency was actually him, and how much of it was this fabricated, manufactured environment of anxiety and hatred and fear that was just shoved down our throats nonstop by the establishment media, and then also through big tech echo chambers amplified those things. It seems to me that it was mostly them doing that, and so that's what has been just really alarming to me, and has maybe changed some of my paradigms about, like, I don't see even the people who are mobbing me on Twitter or whatever. Like, here's an example from recently. So I think I mentioned this the other day, but Seth Rogen on Twitter, calling Ted Cruz a fascist piece of shit or something like that. It's like, I can be mad at Seth Rogen, or I can be mad at the fact that he has to say that, whether he believes it or not, or he's going to lose his job. So he might believe that, but my problem is I don't know. I don't know, because he might not believe it, and he just might be like, okay, I know I can say this and get the mob off my back, and I can keep doing my thing. Like, that's the problem, is that we don't know how many of these people are true believers and how many are just misinformed and how many are just doing what they have to do to survive. I'm more pissed off about whatever created that situation in the first place, to where, like, they know, like, they're very, like, okay, oh, that's my enemy. This person said this thing. If they say these words, if they say, here, take the other side. If someone says, yeah, I think Black Lives Matter or BLM or something like that, like, we are programmed, at least I know I am, to immediately go, okay, wait a second, what do you mean by that? And to maybe have some defenses up. And some of that's appropriate and fair. But my point is that we have to also fight to humanize them. And I agree with, I think James Lindsay did a good job talking about how they play on our charitable interpretations of things. So the true believers want us to interpret abolish the police the most charitable way, when really they mean abolish the police. So I get that. There's a lot of nuance that has to be applied, but I'm just speaking generally that people, as we're going forward, have to be really keyed into, I think a lot of people are looking for answers right now. They're looking for direction. They're looking for comfort. And they're looking for maybe even motivation to be involved and do this. And they're going to be looking for lots of voices, whether it's people like us or, whether, Tucker Carlson or Ben Shapiro or Dave Rubin or whoever, there's a lot of voices out there that are worth listening to. But I would be very careful to anyone, and I have literally no one in mind outside of like a Anderson Cooper or Don Lemon type or Rachel Maddow, or whatever. But I would be very careful if you start to perceive that someone, it seems like what they're operating on is something that is motivating you to hate, fellow people, and, which is the opposite of knowing your enemy, or knowing, who the real antagonist is. I would stay away from those and try to like incorporate into your view of red pilling, like not just listening to something going, that's bullshit, but go, okay, well, there's lots of different kinds of lies. There's lies that are just misinforming. There's lies that are half truths. There's lies that have goals. And if some of those lies or some of that hyperbole seems to at least how a reasonable person could interpret it as having the goal of getting you to hate people or to just fight amongst each other, so that the people who, are pissed off about GameStop can keep profiteering off of everything that isn't that, then I would be very wary of that. So that's kind of what I'm adding into my red pill definition. I don't know what you think about that.
No, I think that that's exactly right. I think that, and I actually really appreciate that you brought this up, because it's something that I've been thinking about, but you actually put into words what I was trying to kind of figure out in my head, is that, like, I think that the people with nefarious motivations are a very small percentage of the total population that's buying into this woke crap. right?
Yep.
I think the vast majority of people on if we call them the left, and I'm just gonna call them on the left, knowing that that is a broad label. But the vast majority of the people that are on the left that we think are bought into this woke crap, like most of them really have no idea, or they've been told this is what you need to do to be a good person, or I think I want to have a lot more empathy for these people because I see them as victims. I see them as victims just as much as someone who loses their job because they wore a MAGA hat or anything like that, because they have been lied to by the media. They have been lied to by people that they trust. They've been forced to read White Fragility and How to Be an Anti-Racist, and told that these are the things, to your point with Seth Rogen, these are the things that you need to do to keep your job. If you want your livelihood, you have to be this type of person. That hurts them just as much as it hurts people like you and I that don't buy into this BS at all.
Yep.
Right. And I think actually the Seth Rogen example is a really good one, because if you look at earlier in that conversation, when like prior to Seth Rogen coming back and calling Ted Cruz a fascist, Ted Cruz actually retweeted Seth Rogen and was like, I don't believe in a thing that you believe in, but I really like your movies. I think that they're funny. And Seth Rogen's response was to come back and call him a fascist, right? But
Yep.
like Ted Cruz, like at least made a good faith effort to say, like, we don't have to believe the same thing. I still think that you're a funny dude and I enjoy your work, right? I think that we need to start looking for ways to find again that common ground, because these people that are in this system where they think that they have to do something, or to your point, maybe they actually do believe it, they are victims just as much as anyone else. They do not. I don't believe that Seth Rogen has nefarious intent.
Yeah.
I
No,
don't.
of course not. Yeah. And um, the thought that I have is, 6 years ago, I would have been the person who made the argument that like roads are socialism. Like I was that guy, right? Like, oh yeah, you don't like socialism? Why do you feel about the fire department? Like that's a stupid argument, but I believed that. I thought that, and it took, some time for me to think and explore those ideas for myself, to realize that they're crazy and wrong. But my point is that we don't know where people are at on that, like on that journey or whatever, like, to use a religious kind of metaphor, people, we would always say, if someone is like sharing their faith with someone, they would say, well, you don't know where they're at, like on that scale, that might be the conversation where they say, okay, I believe this, or it might be something that incrementally moves them closer to that, but we can't know. And so like, I think like you said, we have to try to find that common ground with people, and, hope that, maybe it might be something that just incrementally moves them forward. And there is a needle to thread. I don't want to be naive to this and say it's all like, there's no fighting, there's no tenacity, there's
Right.
no, like we have to be uncompromising, I think, for example. And so I think we have to be an immovable object that also has an outstretched hand, where it's like, no, I'm not going to go along with this. No, I think that's wrong. No, I think that idea is evil, but I don't think you're the bad guy here either. Like, I don't think this friend is the bad guy. And I understand that you might hate me, or you might think I'm racist or whatever. And I'm not going to be the one to break off that relationship either. I know that there are some caveats there, as you mentioned before, but like, generally speaking, we have to figure out how to thread the needle of like, I'm going to be immovable here. I'm not going to compromise. But also I'm going to have an outstretched hand, and also make it easy as possible for people to want to listen to what I have to say. I don't want to give them any excuses that they don't already have to not listen to me.
Right.
And so I want to make it easy for them to listen to me, but I also want to make it obvious that I'm not moving about these things. I am movable about facts. That's what a conversation is. It's not like I know everything and therefore I can't be, persuaded in different ways, but I am going to be immovable in these certain principles, whether it's, freedom of speech, not judging people by the color of their skin or whatever, for example. Does that make sense? So we have to thread that needle. And what I don't want people to hear is, well, let's just compromise with everything. And, let's sacrifice truth for, relationships over here. So that's not what I'm saying, but we do also have to be careful to not become what we hate, and not become the other side that likes to demonize and caricature all of us. And it's a tough row to hoe. I get that. But we have to figure out how to do that. I think that's our best course of action, at least for right now.
You,
You know what I mean?
yeah, I have anytime I take on a new coaching client, I have them agree to a variety of things just to make sure like we're on the same page about expectations. And one of the things I make them agree to, I say, my role as a coach is to serve you. That is not the same thing as pleasing you, because
Mm,
sometimes I have to deliver bad information. I have to try to push them to look at things in different ways. I have to make them angry. I mean, a lot of times, like, and I do this again on Twitter, like all the time, or sometimes I do it on YouTube. Sometimes I get in arguments with my chat because I think sometimes you need to push people's backs against the wall. And that is the greatest thing that you can do to serve them. That is a gift
yep.
that you can give them. And I think that, I totally agree with you that we need to be immovable objects. Like, I'm not obviously, like, I'm a fighter. I'm never going to stop fighting back against this bullshit. And I'm not going to be compromising on that. But I'm also not going to, I refuse to see average everyday people as my enemy. When
Yep.
I wrote my original Medium article, that was the whole point, is like, I'm not going to see people as my enemy anymore. I'm not
Mm,
like, I absolutely refuse to do it. And I refuse to do it towards the right. And I refuse to do it towards the left too, because I think that the people that are driving this are a very, very small percentage of people that have nefarious motives, that have gotten themselves into powerful positions, and that are using those positions for evil. But that does not mean that the people who are taken in by this, whether it's from a lack of time to be able to spend all day reading the news like you and I do, or it's just a lack of inclination because they're not interested in it, they are not the enemy. The people driving this at the top are the enemy.
yep. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And, um, I don't really know where to go from there other than just to like, I had posted this thing, leading up to New Year's. I'm like, I didn't really know what to say to like my locals community, but I didn't want to be a downer. I was like, there's going to be plenty of that for the new year. I want you to enjoy the holidays. But I posted a screenshot of this, of the definition of the term "steal yourself," and I said, look, I don't want to spend too much time in the doom and gloom. It's a holiday season, but just don't know that what 2021 is going to require of you is that you steel yourself, which is to have a steel spine, to become immovable, to be able to withstand blows and opposition and aggression, and to really kind of, like you've said, grow a backbone or put on your big boy or big girl pants or big Zer pants, depending on how they identify. Um, but I think that that's the best way to do that is if you like, what is that? Walk soft or speak softly and carry a big stick or something like that. I think there is something there about like strength and humility, or strength and grace, or like discipline and being uncompromised. One of the things that really strikes me is whenever I think about this, and you can tell me if you think this is right or not, but whenever I think about the establishment, or the ones who, like you said, who are really the ones who we need to be opposing, a thought that I had the other day when I woke up was that humility isn't an option for these people. That they are so entrenched in their own rightness, in their own pride, in their own hubris, in their own belief that they are the elite, superiors of society, whether it's through from socioeconomic or education, or just being part of the same enclaves who go to the same wineries and vacation in the same places or whatever. That humility isn't part of the math for them, and that's why they won't learn from Trump. That's why they won't learn from GameStop, and why they can only double down on their own positions of power and authority. And I think there's the opposite of their pride is humility, and humility doesn't mean compromise. Like you said, you tell them, I'm here to serve you, not necessarily to make you happy. Sometimes serving you is telling you the truth, and that might suck. You might not want to hear it. And so, like, I think one of the things that's most like, and even honestly, I think one thing that a lot of people were turned off by in Donald Trump was the fact that that guy didn't have any humility whatsoever. It didn't seem anyway. And so my point is that the opposite is appealing. And so, part of being that immovable object is being able to thread that needle of like, I'm not going to be like the thing that we actually need to be fighting. I'm not going to be so encompassed. And so, like, what do they call it? Sniffing my own farts. And so, sure myself, in my navel gazing, that I'm totally right about everything. Like, we have to have that humility. And I really think that is like, imagine if there were people who found, like, again, like, this is so rare, we don't really know the power of it. But in these environments, whether it's in the workplace or in their social circles or, their faith communities or wherever online, who found a way to humbly represent and just no, like, I'm going to say no to this. I think maybe one example would be Jordan Peterson. I think Jordan Peterson's a guy who exudes a lot of humility and is very sincere, but also represents, kind of an immovable object. And you can tell that he's immovable on his principles, but he's always learning and listening and wants to, find a way to understand what people are saying. But, just think of the power of that. I mean, I really hadn't thought of Jordan until he came to mind as I was trying to think of someone who exuded that. But that's one guy who embodies those principles, and look at how much impact he's had on the world. So imagine if all of us, in whatever it looked like in our practical circles, were able to embody that idea of being immovable, but also having that humility, which is largely lost, I think, in our culture and our society. Man, I mean, that really is how you implement change, and invite people in and create that bigger tent that we need in order to go forward.
Well, I agree. Well, I think we've been going for almost 2.5 hours, Truman, and I actually have to get ready for Adam's show in a little while, and maybe even have a break, and maybe even get something to eat if I'm lucky. But I think that this has been a really good chat. And again, guys, if you've enjoyed this conversation, please make sure you hit that thumbs up button. Please make also sure that you subscribe to Truman's YouTube channel, which is all in the description below. Truman, thank you for coming on. And hey, I got to bring you on sooner next time. We have a little less time in between chats this time.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. And Carlin, again, I like everything you're doing. I think that, first off, I don't know how you generate the amount of content you generate on a daily basis. It is insane, but it's awesome. And so, like what you said earlier, like, you are fighting for people that, for whether they're doing it on purpose or not, don't feel like they have a voice. And so I appreciate what you're doing. People, whenever there's this saying that whenever you're in a fight, there's two types of people: those who get hit and back out, and those who get hit and lean in and dig into it. And I think that you're someone who, whenever this thing hit you of, being drawn into the culture wars, you leaned in and have been going ever since and fighting for what you believe in. And so I just appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk to people and everything that you do as well. So thanks.
Well, thank you, my friend. And guys, Truman is also a member of my locals community. So if you want to hang out with him some more, that's where you find him. You can also find him in its own locals community. And that's where we get to have actually the really good conversations.
Return to reason.locals.com for me, My Mundane Mind on Twitter, because I'm there till they kick me off. And then, Return to Reason on YouTube.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, that's all. I'm going to wrap it up for this time. And again, I'm pretty sure, unless he's made other plans, that I'm going to be on Adam Krigler's show in in about an hour or 2 hours. I don't even know, 2 hours, I think, 6:30 p.m.
You should probably figure that out.
I should probably figure that out. I'm gonna go eat first, and then we're gonna do that. But thank you guys for spending some time with us. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and we'll see you soon.
Peace.